City of Northland, Channel 8, keeping you informed of events in your community.
Good evening. I would like to call our City Council study session of June 3rd to order. Joanna, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Dodge? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Escobar?
Here.
Councilmember Sowers will be absent. Councilmember Leidy? Here. Councilmember Downing? Here. Councilmember Brown will be absent. Councilmember Whitman? Here. Councilmember Duran-Mullica? Here. Councilmember Wilford? Here.
Thank you. Before we commence with our meeting, would you please join me in a moment of silence honoring and remembering the 12 victims killed recently in the Virginia Beach mass shooting. 11 of the 12 were city employees and 1 was a contractor. The families of these victims will never forget, and our thoughts and prayers are meant for all of them. So if you would join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. All right, our study session begins tonight with water and wastewater project updates. Good evening.
Hello, Honorable Mayor, Council, thank you. I'm Kent Kisselman, the Director of Public Works. Beside me is Daniel Martinez, Senior Engineer in Public Works. Tonight we're going to kind of give you an update on the water and wastewater master plan. We did master plans in 2009 for the water and 2011 for the wastewater. In 2019, this year, we're going to update the water, and the plan is in 2020 to update the wastewater. So it's a good opportunity to review what we've done over the last 8 to 9 years in the 2 divisions. I'll start by, there's a big map behind me, and I thought I'd first go through some of our assets. And some will be on the plan that we've talked about, and just some are just informational. So you see this is our entire city, and then we've truncated, and up here is our section 36 where our wastewater is. The first thing that'll kind of jump out at you is the different colors. Those colors represent the lift stations. So we have 7 lift stations. I believe 7 or 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 lift stations, and each lift station is designated by a color, and that color is the area that goes to that lift station. And then all of the lift stations go to lift station A, and then are forced up to wastewater, to the wastewater plant. But for Bunker Hill, which ties directly into the force main online and goes out to the wastewater treatment plant. So just a couple highlights. This is lift station A, Bunker Hill, and the others. The one over here is G. So you can kind of see the different lift stations in there. The next thing to point out is, of course, again, here's our wastewater treatment facility, and that continues the 8 miles to the north up there on Highway 7. We have we have 4 tanks total that store our water in the city. One is our high zone, and that high zone tank is the one that is looks like a golf ball on top of a stick, and that's actually in Thornton property. There's 2 tanks over there, but one of them is ours. And so we'll review the improvements we did to that a couple years ago in the packet. So that has a capacity of 750,000 gallons. We have 3 tanks. There's 4 tanks actually at the Justice Center. 1 is Westminster's, and 3 are ours. They're called the East Tank, the West Tank, and the North Tank. And again, we'll go through those in the packet, but there's two 2 million gallon tanks and one 3 million gallon tank in that area. So as we begin to go through the packet, if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me, and if you want to look at the map and have any questions, then we can proceed that way. So there's 3 parts to your packet. So there's the initial kind of memorandum style that lists the projects that we've completed or plan to complete, and then the project descriptions, and then the project maps. And so you'll have to do a little flipping or tearing a part of your packet, but I'll probably be working mostly with the project descriptions, and then I'll reference the prices on the projects as well. So we'll begin with the water treatment plant. And again, we completed the first utility master plan in 2009. We're doing another update in 19. Usually want to do those every 5 to 7 years, so we're a little behind, but we'll get back on track this year. The total water project costs in the first 7 projects was estimated to be $4 million. The actual cost was around 3.4, with one of those projects not yet completed. So the first project that was completed in 2013 was the terminal reservoir mixing, and that was to reduce the amount of manganese in the treatment facility's raw water. The second project was improvements to the chemical building, and though that was to install the chemical containment and address some safety and building issues that we had within the building. The third project was the rapid mix and flock basin, and that was completed in 2013. And that increased the coagulation effectiveness and reduced our use of filters. The fourth one was install necessary equipment to dose permanganate, and that was also completed in 2013. And that's the most efficient chemical oxidant for manganese, and it allowed for the removal of the manganese from the clarifiers instead of using the filters. In 2009, they did improvements on the clear well, and the clear well was for CDPHE, Colorado Department of Public Health and Safety, regulations to disinfect the contact time for the peak flows. And if you've been to the water treatment plant, most of you have, and you've taken the tour, you really can't see the clear well because it's underneath all the facilities. And that was completed in 2012, and the SCADA system is, in layman's terms, kind of the... Is there any questions on the first 7 projects? All right. So the following are what we're planning to do in the next cycle of planning. And again, we've talked about it at a couple different meetings. We're really trying to revamp the CIP, and in a few weeks, Heather and I will be bringing forth some CIP criteria for you to review. But it's going to be a kind of a couple-year effort to get us planned into the long-term future. But these are some of the things that we're planning on right now. And again, when we get that updated master plan for the water, that'll also identify critical infrastructure that we need to update and maintain. So with that stated, the estimated cost for the next cycle of projects is about $6.5 million. And again, that's today's dollars. So as we get further on into the cycle, those costs will go up for inflation. All right, number 8 on the list was the terminal reservoir inflow pipe repair. And if you go to our new project page on our website, you can see that project is now completed. We completed that this year, and that was the second leg to the terminal reservoir. If you recall, a couple years ago, we had a break out there on 112th in the plant where we had to replace under emergency conditions a portion of the ductile iron pipe that led to the vault. And so it comes from 112th to a vault, and then the vault either bypasses or goes north or south to the terminal reservoir. So this year we replaced the second half of that went south to the terminal reservoir. So now we have brand new pipe that should last us 50 years, coming from Stanley Lake Pipeline from 112th all the way to our terminal reservoir. So that was completed this year. The second thing on the list was the Clarifier rehab. We're just about finishing that up. I think they're leveling the clear wells today. We did 2 of those. One was scheduled for last year, but the bids came in a little high. So we rolled that money forward and got favorable bids this year and did them both this spring. So that was a really good project to get done, especially before, I think June 5th is our cutoff before we start getting high demands on the flow. So that was a really good thing. We just got that. That'll be done. And again, that's on our new project website page where you can see photos and just description and project cost and things of that nature on there. Third thing on the list, the next few are going to be associated with the headworks. And that was a project we just completed a couple years ago. The warranty period on that just expired, but some of those things we've been able to extend the warranty on particular items that we've had difficulty with. But the construction of the new headworks and that building specifically captures all the odors that were from the plant, traps them into one building, and then kind of shoots them out in exhaust through the top. And that's what that building does. And it's been a massive improvement up there at the headworks or the wastewater treatment facility. If you've ever been up there in years past, you could smell, but now the odors are contained. It's still a wastewater facility, but the odors are much less. The fourth thing on that list was a third secondary clarifier. So we had 2 clarifiers. We added a third one. It's kind of funny to say third secondary clarifier, but that's what it was. And the fifth thing on the list was we decommissioned 2 of those lagoons. So if you can see, no, you can't really see, I'm sorry. But we used to have 4 lagoons. There was 2 on the north and 2 on the south, and we decommissioned the 2 in the south. So those are empty right now, and now we're working on a contract and through the state to go ahead and get those filled up with dirt. So we have approval from the state. We're working on a contract now, and we've been stockpiling dirt from just about everybody we can get dirt from, and we'll be working on getting those filled in. And once we get them filled in, ideas to do up there is maybe a solar farm or something that can help generate power for the plant and cut down on our electrical costs. The number 6 item is pave interior access roads. Again, if you've been up there, it's kind of just roto-milled. Nothing's really designated, so it's just kind of dirt paths. We have a few paved areas, but we'd like to clean that area up and make it look really nice. The construction of Bull Reservoir pH control, that was completed in 2011. And let me find where I'm at. What?
Next page. No, wait.
Where did I miss it? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So that ensured that we could meet our pH through the state for permitting. We'd like to expand the expansion of the laboratory and operations space. Again, if you were fortunate enough to come up there last week for Public Works Week, that was open to the public. We had several people up there. The space is now open and occupiable, and they're working in the lab. It looks great. A great new space for them. And so they're completely moved out of what was the booster area, and now that area can just be used for storage and chemicals and house the booster equipment. The UV replacement and upgrade, we're just about complete on that now. I think this week they'll be out. We replaced a brand new section. We have 3 bays of UV, and we used to reach our permit or meet our permit requirements for the daily use, we had to add a UV channel, and so we added a brand new UV channel, which is more efficient, and at the same time we're rehabilitating one of the other ones, and so we'll have 2 brand new UV channels working up there. And a lot of that work has been done in-house. So our staff, the E&M staff, facilities, distribution collection, been working really hard up there, chiseling concrete and putting in gates and stuff to get that project done and saving tons of money on the cost for that. So those are, oh my gosh, I skipped, didn't I?
It's okay. Keep going.
I skipped around.
You're
I did.
keeping pace with 2019, so you can
Okay.
go back to water and do out years. Yeah.
All right. So that was,
It's a complete report.
okay, you guys are all with me. All right, I'm sorry. You're here to slap me when I apologize. Okay, so let's start with, let's go back to the water. So the 8 projects that we'll be doing in the next planning cycle, we covered 8, the terminal reservoir, the clarifier, the waste handling improvements is the 10th item. So that is, we have two ponds kind of out there at the wastewater plant. If you drive by on 112th, you see them, pretty unsightly. The waste handling improvements are something that we can truly become and reclaim that water and put it back into our terminal reservoir. So we're looking to build a little structure. There'll be some other components that are with that, but the wastewater that we have will go into that, and then it'll process, and then we'll be able to put that back and not send that wastewater to our wastewater treatment plant. We'll be able to reclaim, is it 80% of that?
Yeah, and right now we're wasting about 12 million gallons a year.
So that's a tremendous amount of water, and that's water that we're treating and processing, so that's paid for water. SCADA upgrades, we talked about that. Keeping the SCADA upgrade system is critical to us keeping on track, so we want to do that. That's projected to be out in 2025. Chemical building improvements, we need to bring that up to code. We have some big storage tanks in there, permanganate and chloride, that we house that need to have some containment structures around there, and the old tanks are made of fiberglass and really outdated, so we want to make sure we stay on top of that. Filter media replacement. This is something that we do every 10 years. This year will be the last. We have 8. We have 8 filter medias, and we do 2 each year. So this will be we'll complete the last of the 8 this year. We'll do 2, and then we'll go about 10 years, and we'll start over again and replace that media. And the last 3 things on here are the north low zone, the west low zone, and the east low zone tank. So again, those are those tanks that are right in this area. We completed the painting inside and out of the high zone tank a couple years ago. So that was, so now we need to do the 3 interior tanks. To check on the inside of those, we'll send divers down, they'll check the inside, make sure that they're not rusting out, and then we'll be able to paint the outside of those too and make them look real nice. Any questions on water now that we've kind of skipped around?
So just a reminder that especially for the newer council members, the fees that residents pay on their utility bill for water go directly into the water fund. And Jason will kind of tie this together after Kent's finished with how we're looking at the major infrastructure that Ken will get into in a minute, especially on the wastewater side of things that will be funded solely from the wastewater fund. Those are enterprise funds, so those dollars cannot be commingled with general fund capital improvement program funds. They have to stay separate.
Okay, on to wastewater, which some of it we've already covered. Okay, so again, we plan on updating the wastewater treatment plant master plan next year in 2020. These were the identified projects, the 9 identified projects in the current planning cycle. You'll see the estimated cost was 12 million and the actual cost was about 14. Again, those were due to inflation dollars. So we'll start with number 1, the installation of the standby power, and that was completed in 2017 as part of the Headworks project. And that was our standby generator. So we have a brand new generator out there, and that's just for FYI, that's one of the things we've had some issues with. So they've extended that warranty on that item for us. So we'll continue to work through those issues and continue to push the warranty if necessary. Number 2 is improvements to the BNR treatment system. And Daniel's going to tell us all what BNR is.
The BNR is a biological nutrient removal system. That's pretty much what takes out of all the bacteria and pathogens that are in the wastewater flow. So that train system, we have 3 bays. As water flows through it, there's a series of bacteria and other chemicals that remove and kill those pathogens. So the water that goes out of the wastewater plant is free of any contaminants.
Very good, thank you. So those are going to be, that's number 2, and that was completed in 2012. And then we already kind of covered these projects, the construction of the new headworks, the 3rd secondary clarifier, the decommissioning of the lagoons, the access roads, and now we're down to construction of Bull Reservoir pH control. Now I can flip my page. And that's going to ensure that we, again, are up to date with our pH balance. And we talked about the laboratory upgrades, and we talked about the UV upgrades. Is there any questions on the 9 projects completed under our current utility plan? Okay, to the future. The following are the projects for the next cycle. The estimated cost for the next cycle is about $71 million. We're getting a good start on that already. As we'll start Bunker Hill Lift Station. As you know, we're working with that right now. We're at about 60% design on that. Are we going for CMAR yet on that?
No, not yet.
Not yet. So we're getting real close. But again, that's part of the Carl's Farm, and Carl's Farm is paying their 72% of both the design, and they'll pay the 72% of the construction for that project for us to help minimize the cost. But for Carl's Farm, we wouldn't need the upgrade. So that's going to be great for us. Number 2 on the list is the Lift Station A improvements, and that's beginning this year. We selected a consultant. We'll be bringing that forth to council on the 10th for selection for the design of the Lift Station A improvements. And also number 12, the same consultant, we bid it together, would be the realignment of the force main. And so again, Lift Station A is down here, and that's the lift station that takes all of our waste from all the other lift stations and shoots it up to the wastewater treatment plant. Now there's room on the property of Lift Station A, so what'll end up happening is we'll just build a new lift station. The old lift station will remain in service. We'll do some fancy switching and some tie-ins, and hopefully be minimal disruption in service. Along with that project is the force main realignment, and as you can kind of see, the red line here, it goes on our city boundary. It generally follows the railroad tracks. So we'd like to get away from the railroad tracks. So the first phase of the realignment of the lift station, we're looking at doing a new alignment through our town and getting it up about where the M&O, the maintenance and operations facility is, and replacing that entire section of pipe. Moving further to the north, it'll still need to remain on York as we head north of 128th. And they just have done all that new development, so they have a moratorium on those streets and stuff, and we wouldn't be able to tear up those sections. But several of those sections have been replaced, and as it peaks over about it, just slightly south or north of Bunker Hill, it switches from force main, which is pumping it uphill, to a gravity system. So there's less scour and maintenance that's going on for the gravity system. So we'll get some tests done on that pipe, and we'll see what the condition assessment on that is before we go to a phase 2 on that force main. Number 13 on the list is the solid handling system and primary clarifiers. That is necessary to fully decouple the BNR treatment system from the original aerated lagoon system. So we'll be decommissioning the other 2 lagoons and getting rid of those. And then the 14 is decommission those lagoons after we do the solids handling system and clarifiers. And then again, we want to pave the interior access roads. And for the future, as our city continues to grow, and depending on what development looks like, we'll need to expand our plant capacity of what we'll be able to discharge. So we'll do a plant upgrade, and there's several things that we can do where our plant, we're putting ourselves in a really good position where we wouldn't have to build a brand new plant. So we're setting ourselves up for a good future, both water and wastewater wise. We're really looking forward to getting these master plans done and see where we go. Excited about the CIP stuff and all these projects, especially the Bunker Hill and lift station and force main. Those are going to be just great projects and really necessary for our system.
Lift Station A is one of probably the areas we have the most safety-related concerns about right now. So I know when you look at the staff memo, you see large price tags that come along with these items. But this is major infrastructure. It's aged. It has to be replaced. So Jason will touch on our financial strategy in terms of the approach of how we're going to pay for those different improvements. But I know some of it has a little bit of sticker shock to it, but again, it's significant infrastructure, and it just, in time, it ages, and we've got to make these improvements. Any questions?
No, I think the only thing I'd like to say is thank you so much for the work that you do and your team does. I mean, I've actually visited the wastewater treatment plant. I've actually visited the River. But I mean, it's really important, all of this work that you're doing. You know, people don't realize it. It's kind of hidden. But I mean, this is what makes cities run. We need water and we need waste removal. And so thank you so much for you and your team for all of your hard work and making sure that our residents benefit from it.
Thank you, we appreciate that.
I do have a question. I'm wondering at what point in time on the projects for wastewater would you feel comfortable saying that there will be no resident ever complaining about the smell around the wastewater treatment plant? Or does that never even really happen?
I live over by the Westminster one, and even, as I ride on the trails or run on the trails, you can still smell it from time to time. So does the smell truly ever go away? No. But after we put in the solids handling system and some basins and decommission those back lagoons, I wouldn't even, I don't know that you'd recognize it as far back as that is. If you drove by, I don't know that you'd notice that it was there. Yeah. Right, and that, I guess, let's touch on that just briefly, I guess. So most of the odor comes from the H2S gas that is built up in the system. And so since we do run our pipe 8 miles, that gas builds up in that pipe. And when it gets to the end of the line, it kind of does this burp, and that's where all that gas is built up. And that's why we had, you'll see in our operations budget, $500,000 for bioxide treatment. So there's some things that we're really looking at to improve. What's that? What we'd like to add back in?
The oxygenation.
Adding oxygen into the line, and that was removed from the Headworks project initially for budget reasons, but we'd like to look at potentially putting that back in the lift station force main project. We also have our consultant looking at a different chemical, fluoric acid, instead of the bioxide, which would be, again, we spend $500,000 on bioxide. Fluoric acid may be $50,000 to $100,000. So we're really doing some studies right now to see if that's something that we can do, and talking to the state to see if we can reduce those costs and treat that odor differently, and that'll help with the existing odors as well.
How many FTEs are at wastewater and then water?
I think there's 7 at the wastewater treatment plant, including the operators, and it operates from, I think, 7 to 7. And then at the water treatment plant, it's 24/7, 365, and there's 8 operators there. And then we have a chief plant operator, and then the utilities manager, and then all the lab staff and supporting staff. So it's a good group.
Thank you very much. Are you staying up for the finance?
I am.
You are, okay.
Jason?
Daniel, thank you for being with us tonight. It's
Thank
good
you
to
for
see
having
you.
us.
We don't get to see you very often. Okay, our next item is water and wastewater capital project financing update. Hi, Jason.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So these guys come up with projects and then say, Jason, pay for this. So along those lines of following along with what they had mentioned at the start with kind of feeding off their projects based off of a 2009 master plan. There's also a rate study that was done at the same time in 2009. It was implemented a 5-year plan over 7 years. In 2017, we updated that rate study as we get better information, I guess. It's hard to predict the cost of things decades into the future. So in 2017, we did another rate study, which was implemented in 2018 on the first page of the memo. And really, it's trying to pay for these significant improvements and really ease the pain, I guess, if you will, on an annual basis to the customers. So an update, since we have 1 full year of the plan that was implemented the first year of the plan in 2018, on the second page, this is just something that we'll keep tracking year to year. These are fluid rate models and financing plans. But you'll see, I just broke out a couple of different graphs on that second page to show, that what actually happened versus kind of what the model had indicated. So you can see water and wastewater charges in 2018 were both down about 5% from what the model had predicted. And then what drives specifically water is consumption. So as we have a wet year, which it appears that 2019 is off to a pretty wet start, and we do conservation efforts and appliances get improved and updated, all of those things impact the revenue. So it's not a simple model to implement to say, I'm going to add 1% to next year and therefore revenue goes up 1%. So it's pretty dynamic, and Mother Nature has a lot to do with that. On the wastewater side of things, again, fell just a little bit short of what the model had predicted. Part of that was from information in the third chart, which was based off of water consumption. So when we do the model in 2017, we're basing off of 2016 consumption. As you can see, the last 3 years, 2016 water consumption was higher than it has been the last couple of years, 2017 and 2018. So overall consumption, we hadn't modeled any increase. We actually modeled a slight decrease to accommodate for things like improved conservation efforts. But still, it's again fluid and dynamic. Predicting the weather is a challenge. So we're down, even in 2018 when it was up, it was down 2% from the model. And in 2017 we were down 6.5% with consumption. And this year, as we've gone through the first couple of months with my monthly financials, we've indicated that consumption is down again. And you're probably seeing that in your own homes, I would assume. Probably don't have the sprinklers going full bore quite yet. So with that, after the 2017 rate study, we've implemented a rate modeling software, and that's on the last page of the memo. the graph. The key at the bottom is a little bit cumbersome. The point of this graph is just as a visual. We're not going to go through every line and talk about each element. But what we do have now is the opportunity, rather than waiting 5 to 7 years and doing a rate study, we have the opportunity to go in and modify rates, put in what actually has happened with consumption and just dollars spent, and get a more real-time look at what the model's doing, from 2019 through 2045. So it's a little bit different. I think we'll see how useful it is as we move forward. I like to have the control myself in-house rather than waiting to provide information to somebody to study this every 5 years. Or our other option would be to do a rate study every year, which really wouldn't make a lot of sense. So this is the tool that we're using now. I think the key takeaways from here on this chart, tying back to what Kent was speaking of, is those spikes. Those are the years that we expect to be issuing debt to pay for the projects that they indicated. So you'll see the first one starting in 2019 to 2020 timeframe. That's a large, that Force Main A and lift station, both combined about $28 million. I'm hoping as we refine the scope of the project, that maybe there's some cost savings based off of estimates, and see where that leads. The solid black line on this, that's really just our cash position, and the dotted black line is where we need to stay. So as long as we're above in the model that dotted line, we're in good shape. So again, this is something that we can modify on an annual basis. We'd be bringing back during budget time when we're talking about rates for the upcoming year and kind of show where we're going and where we need to be when we get more information about the projects. Right now, although after the first year, revenues were down about 5%, we're staying the course for 2019. As of now, for 2020, that would be the plan as well. And see, as Ken mentioned, as they do more work on what the projects are going to end up being, and we go out and get bids and better numbers, we'll see if there's any modifications to the plan for the rates as we move forward. So with that, I guess the other piece that I'll tie back is, really there's two methods to pay for projects. One is pay as you go, which is what we just completed with the first phase for the wastewater plant, about a $14 million project that was planned in 2010 to 2011, and that's just getting done in 2018. So you can see that it takes time to build up enough cash to be able to do a large project. Otherwise, we would be doing debt financing. The pros of that is you can actually get to the project in a timely manner. If we needed to save $70 million, we would be here for quite a while trying to generate $70 million of cash to be able to pay for those projects, which is why the debt financing is the methodology that we'd use in these future years to pay for the projects. Another thing with debt financing, and this goes for all projects, is that it spreads the cost of the project out to those that are going to be able to use it. So everybody has kind of a smoother path, if you will, as interest payments and debt payments go over a 20-25 year period, that the users throughout that time period will be the ones paying for it, and it's not a group at that time who save the cash and then they pay for a project that they may never see. So with that is the plan to pay for some significant upgrades, and I'm sure you guys see it on TV and in the media and newspaper our surrounding communities are in the same boat. We're all doing the same thing as finance directors of figuring out how to finance these projects with the least amount of burden that we can put on the customer as possible.
With that being said, are you going to bring back the rate comparison studies still annually for us with the other municipalities so we can compare where we are?
Yeah, and in 2017 we did that, and we had estimated and spoke to the surrounding communities of what their plans were, but year after year those change. So yeah, we'll keep a pulse of where we're at.
Not to do a rate study, but just to show us the comparison
we
of
do
the
a
rates.
benchmark.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any questions for Jason?
Just two other quick things. If you recall, back in the fall, we branded a lot of these capital improvements as the underground. And so we created that logo. And so that's that branding theme is going to carry forward as we get into a lot of these projects, and you'll see it on project signage and that sort of thing. There's a project page on our city website that outlines a lot of these projects, and to Kent's earlier point, they launched the interactive map where you can actually click on a location and pull up project information. So I encourage you to do that. One of the other aspects related to water and wastewater is Water Rights 101, and that's the session that Tammy Moon is going to, our water administrator, is going to come in on July 15th and talk about how that plays into. And so hopefully for some of the newer council members, that'll kind of bring full circle how these systems all work together in terms of how we bring water in to Northglenn, and then when we go to discharge it from our wastewater treatment plant, how that works. And if you have not been to one of the facilities, let us know and we can get a tour scheduled for you.
Okay, thanks, Jason. All right, we will move to Northland housing policy discussion. Brooke, and Debbie, and Alan, and who else?
Pretty much the kitchen sink of planning.
So as they go ahead and get that pulled together, this has been a big team effort in terms of pulling together what we're considering part one of this housing policy discussion. There's quite a bit of data that you've seen in your packet that we're going to walk through tonight. And ultimately, we're looking for direction from council in terms of where you want to go next. So I believe on June 17th, I have slated housing policy discussion part 2. So based on discussion tonight and the direction that council wants to go in, we can do that on June 17th, or if staff needs additional time to pull information together, I'll let you know that, and we'll push the second part of the discussion out further if there's going to be a second part of the discussion. But I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of staff. As I mentioned, it's been a big team effort, and so I think we've provided a good foundation for this discussion, and we can go back if there's any gaps or missing pieces in your minds and get that information.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Before we jump into the formal presentation, I want to talk a little bit about data. One of our challenges with an exercise like this is what data do you use and how do you use it? And one of the challenges that we had when we first started this exercise is we started out with about 140 slides just because we're planners and we want to make sure that we're being transparent. But really part of our challenge is also understanding where the data comes from and what its intended purpose is. And so what we've tried to do with this exercise tonight on the data side is to really show you what most organizations, agencies, profit, nonprofit, utilize the data for without really drawing conclusions on what the data is intending to say. what we would suggest is if you have questions or want our thoughts, we have varying degrees of thoughts about what the data is really trying to say. But more importantly is that we didn't want to have information that was trying to suggest one thing or another, because this is clearly a difficult task to begin with in terms of how you promulgate this information. And with that being said, we are essentially what I would say is a few shades shy of like a formal housing study. And really what we're trying to do is to get a set of baseline understanding of what Northglenn looks like, most importantly with itself and also with some regional context. So with that being said, Alan is going to walk you through a lot of housing data here. And then Becky is going to come up and talk about our existing policies, which I would describe as tools in our toolbox. And then Ashley is going to come in and talk about what other communities are doing in the surrounding area. And then at the very end, Heather and I will help support that, is to facilitate a conversation about what those next steps look like as far as how we move forward with this conversation. I will say that Alan's portion of the presentation is a little bit lengthy. And if you guys are feeling like we're going a little too slow, please let us know, because really what we're trying to do is to show that we're being thorough and also trying to be as balanced in our approach with the information that we have. So with that, I will hand it over to Alan, and away we go.
Yeah. Thank you, Brooke. Mayor, Council, I'm going to go through the first 3 items here on the outline. I'll probably do some combination of pointing behind myself and just indicating where on the slide. I'm going to try to go over most of these in a decent amount of detail to explain them, but if either I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know. You go through this a number of times, you do kind of start to gloss over it at a certain point, so just let me know on that. I do want to just say a few things about our data sources. So point out the second one on here, actually I'll start with that, the U.S. Census American Community Survey. So this is really kind of the baseline for a lot of different data sources. Organizations utilize this. These are 5-year averaged estimates. So the Census Bureau does basic demographic surveys of a small amount by communities at different scales. Northland is small enough where we don't have single year data available. It's only released in 5-year averages. So what that means is, if there's a 2017, that's the most recent release of it, it's really the previous 5 years averaged together. So there's a bit of a lag in some of the timeliness for some of the census data, but it's really the only data available for a lot of these demographic metrics. We look to the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, the State Demography Office and Division of Housing for guidance in some of this housing data. A lot of their base data comes from ACS census data as well. Same with Esri Business Analyst. You may have seen some of that in some of the economic development reports. That's a slightly older version of ACS data, so it's all coming from kind of the same place. I think Dr. Cog, our website has Dr. Cog demographics. That's the same thing with census data on there. We also looked into, got some apartment rental vacancy and rent rates from the Apartment Association. They have quarterly reports we looked into. This Tiana Nice's market report is like a weekly real estate report. I don't think any of those slides made it to this final version, but one of the sources we looked into, and then the Adams County Assessor's Office for home sales data. So getting into the base demographics, just a high-level overview table of a few key things that impact housing and cost of living in Northland. I'll point out the median age between Northland and Adams County is roughly the same, a little bit lower than Colorado. Northland's median age has actually remained relatively unchanged since 2010. And then the household income, again, Northland and Adams County just about in line with each other, a little bit lower than the state, but not a huge difference. Population below the poverty line, Northland's about 1% lower than the county. Colorado's in between there, but all relatively close to each other. We'll say that, and there's a graph coming up later on, that while the ages remained relatively the same, the median income has increased quite a bit from 2010. This map is a map we've produced for some of our projects relating to community block grant eligibility. So it's percent low to moderate income for different census blocks in the city. The shaded yellow blocks are the ones with 50% or more of the population, so they qualify for grant funding. It's just an indicator of kind of where the lower income populations are in the city. And really what this tells us is that they're spread pretty evenly, or there's no real great concentrations in terms of east, west, north, south. And then the red number is a comparison to the previous low to moderate income for the census block group. So there are some big changes from the previous year. This is what HUD uses to determine eligibility, and actually it's a few cycles old. It's only based on 2015 ACS, but that could indicate that there's a high level of kind of residential turnover. It could also just be a reflection of low sample sizes that the census data plays itself to. With all of these, there's a bit of a level of uncertainty. So when you get to these real fine-grained geographies, there's not as much confidence in the data.
I'll just put in one quick anecdote to this is that because this has changed, some of the tracks that we didn't do CDBG program funding with, we now can because they've shifted. So with our Connect Northglenn, there's opportunities for us to start applying it to the tracks that weren't eligible before that now are. So it kind of has an up and down to that. So
this is a graph charting individual years of ACS data for median household income, and it shows that we've caught up to Adams County basically since 2010. So there was a gap of about $2,000, a little bit more at the beginning of the decade. Northland's median household income has closed that gap, and as of the last year, I think it was about $200 more. Getting into housing units, so this is a table comparing kind of across the top single units, so that's single family detached, townhomes, duplexes, that sort of thing, and then multiple units, which would be condos and apartments, and then owner versus renter occupied kind of horizontally across the table. I'll just point out for single units, the owner to renter ratio is about 80-20. For multiple units, it's almost all rental apartments. We have very, very small numbers of kind of classic condominium type development. Overall, the owner-renter rate in Northland is about 55% to 45%. And then charting that, so this is owner-renter rate over time. That last number here, 55 and 44.7, would correspond to 2017 on this graph. So charting that back to 2010, relatively stable. It went up by a few percentages middle of the decade. It's gone down a few percentages, again, something to keep an eye on or to help track over time, but no major, the lines aren't crossing. So jumping into some of the cost data we're able to find, even before we do set that up or get into that, I'll set up with kind of a ratio of the land uses in the city. So these are percent of land area, not necessarily units, just area dedicated to different land use types. About 60% of the city is single-family housing, about 11% multifamily housing, non-residential open spaces on there. And then just want to point out that 0.4% for vacant, meaning that there's very, very few, I think 12 acres on the table, very few clearly are really vacant properties. We did include Carl's Farm, Station Village, and Civic Center. We kind of distributed them among the land uses above based on our knowledge of the plans, development plans that have come forward, the rezonings already. So not saying that those are completely spoken for since they haven't been built, but they're in the development process already, so we didn't include those as vacant. Okay. We're going to start with the Metro Denver vacancy and rent report. This is just a screenshot of the executive summary. Just point out a couple things. The green bars in the graph in the top there are the average rent metro area wide. So starting in 2014 to the most recent quarter ending at the end of March. about an increase of $400 metro area wide in average rent. Below that is the county overview, each county. Snapshot in time, Adams County is on there on the top of the list. It's actually the lowest average rent of the 7-county metro area. Vacancy rates on the lower portion of it. There's a couple counties with lower vacancy rates as well. Okay, so this graph is within the report. It's by sub-market, which is how they conduct the rental survey. I've highlighted the Northland, Thornton, and the Westminster bars in yellow there. That comes up okay, yeah. Because even though Northland Thornton is one of the sub-markets, actually they split it in half. Northland east of I-25 is Northland Thornton, and then west of I-25 they lumped into Westminster. So both of them are highlighted on here to represent Northland. It's really these two sub-markets are basically most of Adams County west of I-76. So it's Thornton, it's Westminster, it's Northland.
What's the red line?
And then the red line, so the red line I added on top of that just so you can kind of carry your eye across the graph to help compare with the other sub-markets. Looking at the ones lower and above it, you know, our two sub-markets are in the lower half of all of them. There's about a quarter of sub-markets that have lower average rents even than Northland, Thornton, and Westminster. This graph here is Adams County compared to the entire metro area in terms of average rent over time. The bars or the points here are consistently lower, but they follow the same trend almost exactly. It's consistently about 6, 8, 10% lower. But when the metro area goes up, Adams County goes up. We're 1/7 of the metro area anyway, so we influence that. But it's it shows us that what's happening at the metro area scale is happening basically at the same time in Adams County. And then here again is just a little screenshot from the report of the geographic extent of this data. The average rents between the two submarkets, kind of on either side of the Adams County overall average about $13.75 a month in average rent, and that's all apartment units, all number of bedrooms, just kind of a high level summary of the rent.
And so what I think is worth, I'll jump in here just on a couple things, is that our sub-market areas, the two, follow very closely to what Adams County's rental market trend is. So when you jump back one slide, you can, the corollary here that could be, you can conclude is that Adams County and Northglenn are tracking below what the metro trend is by about 6%. So I think that's just one of the things that you could extrapolate from the data as far as where we sit in the market metro-wide.
Shifting gears a bit from rental rates, this is a summary of residential sales, so home sales. We went straight to the Adams County Assessor's Office for this, so this was raw data of individual sales. The last two appraisal cycles that they published summary data on. Kind of speaks for itself, but it shows, especially the last couple of years, approaching 10% year-over-year increase in overall average sales price. And we have more data that goes back to 2010. It was a slightly different, slightly less refined from the county. We didn't include it in here, but kind of our rough look at it shows that housing prices have almost doubled since 2010 to comparing where they are today.
And a couple of other things that we're going to hand something out here on this slide. But one other thing that I think is important to note is that in that same 10-year frame when we pulled this data is that we've had roughly about 4,800 plus transactions. So when you look at the 28 on the 4-year total, the 10-year total is about 4,800. When you look at our total number of residential units, it's about 9,600. So one thing that you could and keep in mind that this is where we get into the subjective nature of this. We don't know how many of those are repeat sales. We don't know if those are refis necessarily, but what they indicate is that potentially a significant percentage of our housing stock has turned over in ownership in a 10-year frame, which I think as we move forward through some of this data is going to be very relative to sort of see. What we just handed out was we got a question from the mayor on this before the meeting about, well, what's everybody else doing and what are they on their median home prices, which is a great question. One of the reasons why we didn't actually put that in the original data is because it's so hard to do this exercise that we did for a whole bunch of different communities. However, there's a website called City Data, and they're a metametrics website that does everything nationwide, and it goes all the way down to the type of restaurants they have, to crime rates. The challenge with the website is that you can't really dive in or peel off how the data is, where the data originates from. So what this is, and also it's also the date and time in which the data is reflective of, and in this case, the data on the website is 2016, but it gives you a fair idea of what in 2016 where we are in the market, and I would argue that when you look at our trends on these other slides, if you prorate those out, you can kind of see there's a regular progression to that. And just to note, if you look on our slide here, we have it at 281, and on their data it's 287. So yet again, this is one of those things that we don't want to throw out. I'm just prefacing this because I don't want to throw out that one data is more accurate than the other, but we believe that at least in this housing data, we pulled this straight from the county, straight from sales, and they actually, as the footnote shows here, is that these are qualified sales. So this really sort of helps get us a little bit more fine-tuned than what this necessarily represents. But I think for trend purposes, this is a good reflection of where we are. We picked these randomly for North Metro, and then some others that I think have been discussed in the past. We can obviously pull more if you guys would like, but just so you know, there was no necessarily logical rationale why we pulled these. We just tried to get something representative. Any questions on any of that?
These next set of slides are some more Census ACS data to help summarize and track some of these cost trends over time. So this first one is monthly owner costs, parentheses with a mortgage, because the next slide is without mortgage, meaning costs, mortgage, but also property taxes, insurance costs, utility costs, kind of what are the overall average housing cost or median housing cost in this case. So this is Adams County and Northglenn both on the graph, decreasing over time a little bit. There's a spike here at the end. Again, this I think maybe reflects the lag in some of the data too, but also that housing costs actually were decreasing in terms of total costs. This isn't just new sales, this is like all existing costs. So these could be people in their 10th year of a mortgage, 20th year of a mortgage. We suspect that lower finance rates during this time, and kind of a few years before this, led to more refinancing, which could lower monthly costs. That's our theory, but I don't know if there's any one answer. Next one again without mortgage. So these are more of either the fixed income population, or they've paid off their mortgage, long-time residents, or potentially bought the house outright. But this will just be the property taxes, insurance, and utilities slowly increasing. It's only a difference of looks like $390 to $420 over the 7-year span here. So $30.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So why do you think we're seeing this increase from 2016 to 2017, the higher, the bigger spike? Is that just taxes?
Oh yeah, without the mortgage, it's got to be. Yeah, I would suspect property taxes because the reappraisal years as home sales are going up, it's reflecting in the property taxes. I don't know if I know enough about insurance rates or utility rates, if those have changed all that much, but we know in the news that property tax rates have increased.
And I think also, if I'm not mistaken, did not the Adams 12 mill levy pass as well as the fire district? North Metro, sorry. Putting on my old hat for district. But anyways, I think those are possible other factors that could be contributing.
Wanted to put median monthly rent in here as well, so this isn't from the Apartment Association data, this is from the Census Bureau, just so we can compare like for like. More of a clear trend of increasing rents. Then also that Northglenn and Adams County are basically identical here. So all three of these tie together to this fourth graph here that is just overall median housing costs. So this is rental and ownership costs overall for the city since 2010, kind of combined together. So all of where housing costs may have dropped for some, rent costs have increased for others. It looks like it kind of averaged out overall, and then the last couple of years have gone up overall for housing costs.
Can you just have to monthly picture for a second?
So,
The other thing I wanted to mention is that in the slides that we provided you earlier, it was Q1 of 19, and that was about 1380. So one of the things that we looked at is we actually charted that out, and it more or less follows this trend. And so point being is that while that's a snapshot in time for today's first quarter of 19, it's consistent with this data as well. So.
our last major section of data, at least, we're calling it affordability indicators, but it's kind of this next step of analysis. We're trying to compare housing costs with income and determining whether these costs are burdensome, how burdensome. High level look at, but something that probably this is where kind of the next steps would be naturally. So with the available data, kind of summarizing some of the different charts and graphs available with the Department of Local Affairs and Demography Office. They have some good summary data on both owner and renter occupied housing as a percent of income. So this table here, or this kind of list of data, compares all housing units that are owner occupied in the city, what percent of them are paying over 30% of income. So that 30% of income number is kind of the dividing line between housing cost burdened and not being housing cost burdened. So according to the most recent ACS data, 18.4% of owner-occupied homes in Northland are housing burdened. Of that, the two data points below it, and these should have been both indented in, but the 12.9 and the 5.5 would add up together to be 18.4. So these are just kind of sub-bullets of that 18.4. 5.5 are very housing cost burdened. They're paying more than 50% of income on their housing costs. Just for comparison, for context, Northland's rates across these different kind of breakouts of level of burden are all lower than the county, though. So about 7% lower number of housing units that are cost burdened. Compare that to renter occupied, so same sort of metric, 30% housing costs being burdened, quite a bit higher numbers. So where it was 18% owner occupied, it's over 50% of renter occupied households are housing cost burdened, so their rent is 30% or higher of their income, and then 22% are more than 50% of their income. That is still fairly in line with the county, actually much closer to the county. Northglenn is higher than the county, so for both county and Northglenn, renters are overall much more burdened than people who own their housing units. It's the big takeaway from these slides.
And I would just argue that I think these are probably two of the more important slides in our data set, because what we're really looking at here is when we talk about owner occupied and renter is like what part of the population is struggling. This is probably the clearest indication of what that represents, because as Alan said, 18.4% are 30% or more, and that's and for mortgage financing, that's typically what they look at is 30% of your debt service goes to the mortgage, and whether or not where that sits in with the rest of your debt that you have. And so that's kind of the measure here that we're using for that indicator.
Next graph, median rent. So this is comparing the median rent from a few slides ago or graphs ago to the what percent of the household income that rent represents. So for 2017, it's just slightly over 31%. Those are all percents on the left. That means that the median rent represents a burden for the household incomes that they're serving. So for Adams County, that's hovered right around 31% for this entire time. Our fund's been a little more fluctuating. It's probably a result of a lower sample size. Could be a little more specific, but they're joined there at the end. And then for owner costs, this one was maybe a little more surprising. It actually shows that the median owner costs have been decreasing as a percent of household income. Again, I don't know if we have, great explanations necessarily. We can make some educated guesses with the refinancing. A lot of homeowners may have lowered their costs. Median incomes were increasing for the community overall, and maybe just suspecting maybe those median incomes are more focused in these ownership group than the renter group, so that they may have benefited more. And also, again, just the lag time still between our sales data and when some of these estimates were released in collecting data, they might not fully reflect the snapshot today from even a couple of years ago. This graph, so this is a screenshot graph from a Department of Local Affairs metric. I'll explain this one in a little bit of detail. There's a lot going on in it. It compares houses that are affordable by income bracket. So I was able to select it by county. This is selected for Adams County. Doesn't get any more focus than that, but for Adams County overall. And then highlighting in the middle here, the income bracket 50 to 75, because that's where Northland's median income fell, was at 62. So based on Northland's median income, the orange bars are the number of housing units that would be affordable to that bracket, and then in the blue are the number of households. So basically, if the orange bar is higher, there's more units than households, meaning that there's not a deficiency in housing stock. So right at our median income, according to this metric, there's a surplus of housing units compared to the housing or the median income. Obviously, the more money you make, much more housing units become available, so there's a surplus, and then the less money a household makes, there's less housing units that are affordable, and that's where there's a gap in housing, and there aren't enough units to serve those incomes.
And so I think part of highlighting this particular slide is that because when we talk regional or whether or not there's a housing demand or housing shortage for certain demographic, this one sort of speaks to that. For the county, obviously, as Alan said, the data sets don't drill down to local zip code or jurisdictions or census tracts, but it is an interesting thing to see that countywide there appears to be for our relative median income bracket adequate housing stock for that median income.
Would I be correct, though, at the bottom it says the source is IRS, whatever, 2016? So is this from the 2016 data?
That's correct. And once again, this is one of our challenges, is that when we look at this is the best, most reliable data that we have. And yet, again, it comes short of doing a more detailed housing study, which would in essence potentially look at a more deeper dive, drill down of data. But that's why we're presenting it.
It's just hard to compare what's happening now with 2016.
Yeah, and really the only thing when it comes to income is this sort of census data. I mean, you can track sales and rent a little more real time with some of these certain commissioned surveys, of existing business, but in terms of kind of population-wide income, I mean, that's something that is really only reported when the Census Bureau asks, and they kind of methodically go through their survey cycles, but until there's either a comprehensive one, next one's coming up in 2020, we have to rely on these kind of 5-year surveys that average out, so there's a natural lag time in this sort of data.
And I think the other thing that's also important is that you don't want to have like snapshot like the first quarter of 19 be the only factor in which you consider this, because you don't want to also be making a decision based on potential bubble or economic cycle. So part of the reason why you see this, and the city data is actually widely used by a lot of different news organizations as a reference point. And one of the earlier references that we had was the Nielsen, is that?
Yeah.
The Nielsen data
snapshot.
actually does like market snapshots of like what the weekly sales, what's on the market, what's posted and whatnot. The thing is that amplitude is drastic because it's based on what people think their house is worth and not necessarily the full picture of where things are at. So once again, it's like from a planning perspective, it's really trying to understand the trend as much as anything.
Just a couple of more slides here for my part. We did do a quick just online mortgage calculator, trying to get a ballpark idea of what the Northland median income would potentially be able to purchase, so $64,000 income. We came up with a range based on some of the inputs below, $265,000 to $305,000. So keeping things like we were aiming for 30% of income or less. Interest rates currently are pretty low. We did use a very low down payment as kind of the entry market sort of down payment to get this range. Again, it looks like this range may have been something that was affordable a couple of years ago. The table on recent sales was showing, I think the average was 336. So that could be where, you know, whether that is going to start going down or not. Hopefully we can keep tracking on the assessor data. And then also just want to point out that other assumptions, additional debt, student loan debt, credit card debt, individual household circumstances aren't captured in this sort of kind of quick snapshot calculator. We did throw up a couple of screenshots of more elaborate calculators out there and in fact indicators available. We didn't take this step at this point just because there's so many different scenarios to possibly play out, 1 adult, 2 adults, how many children, varying housing costs, but the snapshot of estimated costs was available at the county level at least. I think it changes based on census data. The specific one was an MIT sort of methodology for living wage calculator. There's other ones out there, so this could be a further kind of more in-depth step in terms of evaluating you know, what sort of incomes and housing costs and different dynamics, you know, residents of Northland experience. So we've been looking mostly at the median, so that's kind of one point, but there's a wide range on either end of the spectrum. So that'll conclude my part. I think Becky's coming up for policies, I guess. Should I sit here for any other questions?
Do we have any other thoughts, questions about the data?
Great. Let it percolate, and I'm sure there could be more.
All right. I'm just going to walk through some of our existing policies, starting with comprehensive plan and master plans, which are really guiding principles for us to consider as we make policy decisions. And then getting into more of what Brooke was talking about, like our actual tools in our toolbox. So starting with our comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2010, it does call for us to diversify housing stock and encourage the development of new housing products, recognizing that a lot of our housing product is very similar in nature. It actually goes into more detail, telling us to consider the creation of a citywide housing authority should the need arise to aid low or moderate income households. It does guide us to provide zoning on critical vacant parcels that could encourage the development of a variety of housing stock or types, and tells us to investigate gaps in the housing market to determine where opportunities for varying housing products could exist to diversify the housing stock overall in the city. Again, it goes into more detail where it asks us to also encourage the consideration of zoning tools like mixed use zoning. So that would be like our mixed-use neighborhood districts. We just adopted 3 in our new Unified Development Ordinance. It also encourages us to look at opportunities where we can encourage redevelopment or revitalization of existing neighborhoods and provide housing stock diversity, so possibly through encouraging housing additions or different tools that residents can use to change their housing stock. It does direct us to coordinate with Adams County Housing Authority to identify areas of need, as well as investigate partnerships with the Housing Authority. So getting into our sub-area plans, these are more localized plans. So the first one we adopted in 2016 is Curls Farm Master Plan. This one calls for the diversity of housing as well. It actually points out that at that time in 2016, the city was filling the role as providing starter or more affordable housing stock for the region, and really guided us to look at ways to diversify the housing stock, stating that, you know, providing a mix of housing types to fill gaps in the city's existing housing spectrum could leverage opportunities and complement the station that's going into the north of Curls Farm. It also directs us to consider providing different housing types for various stages of life. So the next sub-area plan is 2017, this 112th Station Area Master Plan. Again, you'll see a common theme here. It's really discussing diversifying housing and directing us to look at a mix of housing products that should provide emerging styles of housing that aren't currently found in Thornton or Northglenn, and should take advantage of the transit infrastructure that's being put in by RTD. It also encourages us to provide a diverse range of housing options and densities, especially higher densities as we get closer to the station. And then finally, I think this is our last sub-area plan that we adopted. In 2017, we also adopted the Civic Center Master Plan. And this directs us to create opportunities for new housing options in Northglenn that are in close proximity to many existing amenities. It encourages us to look at higher end products that front the park. It's not produce, it's products. Senior housing, to consider that, it would be complementary considering the uses that are going in on the site. And then also to accommodate a variety of housing types, flats, townhomes, condominiums. So kind of all of these different high-level guiding documents are telling us to think about different housing types, which would create sort of a range of places people can enter the market. Getting more into our tools in the toolbox, we did just adopt the Unified Development Ordinance, which did try to take these guiding recommendations from these plans and put it into action on things that we can actually implement. So through this process, we did start allowing the single-family residential uses or zone districts in the city to develop an accessory dwelling unit on their property. We also created some new zone districts, including the small lot residential zone district. Doesn't currently exist in the city, but it does provide an opportunity for a developer to come in if they were to acquire a large piece of property to subdivide into much smaller single-family residential lots and develop them. We also have 3 new mixed-use commercial districts, mixed-use neighborhood, mixed-use corridor, and mixed-use regional, which provide a range of densities and development styles that would encourage putting residential right next to commercial amenities.
And what I just want to point out is that with the 3 master plans that we did, they mimic very closely these new tools. The Carl's Farm actually has something very close to RS3 and mixed use. The 112th Station Village project actually has, is it the mixed use or is it the mixed corridor?
Yeah, they've
Mixed use corridor.
zoned to mixed use corridor.
Yeah, and then also here for this property, we applied the same zoning as well. So I think what's interesting is as we're moving forward with these master planning projects, which is implementing the comp plan, we also are creating these tools and we're applying these tools readily to our master planning efforts, which sort of shows that we're kind of trying to hit the cycle here and make sure that we're staying on top of it. So I think it's a good example of, our progression and our strategy about diversity of housing and really trying to bring something new to the community.
Just a few other existing tools in the toolbox. So as previously went over, the UDO does provide the new zone districts that could allow people to zone, which would create that more diverse housing stock as well as accessory dwelling units. We do have private activity bonds in our toolbox. In 2018, those were used for the reserve apartments, if you guys remember reviewing that case. In 2019, it's proposed to be the First Step program, which is a mortgage assistance program or a home ownership mortgage assistance program. We also have the Metro DPA, which is a down payment assistance program. And so if anybody has any questions on any of our comprehensive plan, high-level policy guiding statements, or any of the tools that we have in the toolbox currently, I'm happy to
just ask a question. So I was thinking about our most recent presentation about the 112th station area. I don't recall kind of a mixed-use feel to that presentation.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So they zoned to mixed-use corridor. They aren't required to put commercial in. It limits height and density, but would allow a commercial component. They are interested in a commercial component. In the master plan, we put the commercial in as an optional because the market wasn't super strong for that at that corner. And so we're hoping that they can make it work. They're looking at, or what they've been telling us they want to do is something that's neighborhood focused, so like a yoga studio or ice cream shop or coffee shop or something like that, if they're able to make it work.
And I think they're still working out the overall program in terms of owner-occupied versus rental. So that's one of the other aspects that you'll see, or that will likely come forward when it goes to the site development plan phase. So.
All right, so then I will give it over to Ashley to talk about some of the adjacent cities and some of their efforts.
So again, we did kind of a high-level just survey of what some of the neighboring jurisdictions are doing, some of the tools that are potentially available. And again, we're happy to do a deeper dive depending on how this conversation goes tonight, moving forward. Just starting, housing assistance in Northland, we obviously do not have a housing authority, but we are part of Adams County that does have a housing authority. They're now renamed Unison Housing Partners. One thing to note is that Northglenn currently doesn't have any Section 8 projects or buildings. We do have about 179 housing vouchers. So just 179 kind of singular residents that are utilizing that program through Adams County. Adams County, again, they have a housing needs assessment and then a balanced housing plan, and they are also responsible for administering kind of some of those HUD-based programs, the CDBG Community Development Block Grant and Home Funds, which is a mortgage assistance program.
So actually, could you just jump back to that slide? So one thing I want to point out is that on the earlier slide where we talk about renter occupied, we have about 6,100 rental between single family and multifamily units, and we have 179 vouchers, which effectively is the current modern day version of Section 8 as it currently operates through HUD and whatnot. So I think it's kind of a really important thing here is that when we talk about the poverty-based aspect, there could be an education factor here, but I think to me it's one of those things that actually really did stand out when we looked at this data on the rental side, is that we have out of over 6,000 units, we've only got 179 folks that are utilizing this program.
So I think that second bullet is important, is that it is consolidated.
Yes, absolutely.
Neighboring city and county of Broomfield, similar, they do have a housing needs study and a housing programs action plan. They also have a housing advisory committee, and then currently, one of the things that they're doing to kind of address the housing issue that our region faces is they're exploring allowing ADUs, which again, as Becky mentioned, is something that in our Unified Development Ordinance that we do now allow. Our immediate neighbor, Thornton, they do have a housing master plan, and then they also adopted an affordable housing policy statement, which is an appendix to that master plan. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but in the memo, the very last section was a series of links, and that those lead you to different resources that are listed in this kind of in these slides, and one of the links does lead you to the affordable housing policy statement. It's just a one-pager, so I think that's a really interesting one to check out. Some of the highlights from their policy statement, they do want to promote having a supply for 40% or below, and that's the average or the area median income. They want to promote a balance of housing types for different income levels and promote access to public transit and other services like grocery stores. And then that they will finally consider financial support on a case-by-case basis. And on that note, so what we heard from their planning staff is in terms of the case-by-case basis, last year they did do kind of one financial support project, and that was for senior units, a project called Crossing Point. They did a variety of kind of incentives and financial support for them. They utilized kind of an older utility credit that was on file to cover their water tap fees. Their community development block grant funding covered their wastewater fees. They did waive some easement fees, which was about $20,000 that would have been kind of part of the entitlement process. And then they did reduce some development standards. And one example of this, they would have typically required a median in the roadway in front of their development, but they did not make them do the standard payment in lieu. And so using that money, they were able to do more units in place of that. So those are the types of examples that they have done so far with those incentives.
And I just want to also mention on the CDBG side of it is that Thornton is a direct recipient because of their population. We are not. We are not likely to ever foresee becoming one because you have to have over 50,000 for population. So, and they also have a substantial amount more money than we do with CDBG.
Westminster, another close neighbor. They started with adopting goals as part of their city council strategic plan. And then out of those goals, they completed a housing needs assessment. Part of that housing needs assessment is they convened a task force that they brought in outside professionals in the housing realm to sit on, and that was part of their study development. And then again, they followed that up with an affordable and workforce housing strategic plan, and that again was one of the links that's in the memo if you wanted to check out that plan. It's I think with all the appendices, it's like over 200 pages, so we didn't want to provide all of these as attachments for you guys.
Light reading.
But if you want to just kind of, browse some of these links and get a better feel for what's out there, we thought that was important. Kind of on a day-to-day basis, they also do some financial support. They do fee waivers, tax rebates, land donations, and then this year they brought a real estate coordinator on staff to kind of coordinate all those land donations and land audits and all those types of deals that are going on. The city of Arvada, again, they similarly started with a city council strategic plan, and some of their goals were related to a mix of lot sizes, development densities, and housing types and styles, which even in our master plan and comprehensive plan that Becky talked about, those are kind of common themes, is having a mix and a diversity of housing stock. They also had a goal to have 25% of their new housing in urban centers and corridors. Urban center is a term designated by the Denver Regional Council of Governments, or Dr. Cog. Those are kind of areas that throughout the region are just identified to have more intense development. Our urban center is the marketplace and surrounding area, so just to give you kind of an idea of that. And then finally, one of their goals is related to attainable senior housing. And we did also throw a couple of nonprofit examples on there just to give a feel for what's out there. The West Denver Single Family Plus initiative was kind of interesting because it's related to accessory dwelling units, or an ADU pilot program. They offer kind of twofold assistance. For one, they have sort of pre-approved architectural plans for detached accessory dwelling units. So that kind of reduces the cost of having an architect do that design for you. And then they also have mortgage and home loan assistance programs for that too. And then a lot of municipalities, when I was doing some research, have worked with the Elevation Community Land Trust and then Habitat for Humanity, and those are kind of scattered. So that just means like they would buy one property at a time and develop that as an affordable housing unit. So that kind of, again, that's scattered, and it would be kind of a smaller impact, but that nonprofit and Habitat for Humanity, there I'm sure others out there that are doing that too, but especially those two have been typical partners for municipalities to work with. So that was it on my end, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, we're happy to do a deeper dive, contact certain cities or municipalities that you've heard that have policies or studies that you'd like us to get for you. Questions?
All right. So next part of this is sort of hearing from you guys, and you've heard the data. You've heard about what we're doing and what other communities are doing. And I think what, my perspective on some of this is that we've, with mixed-use zoning, with doing the master plans, with trying to diversify housing stock and whatnot, we're trying to do all of these things in the means of within our capacity that we've had in the past in order to try to address some of this, knowing that it's been on the books for a long time of how do we diversify, how do we identify housing gaps, things of that nature, and sort of trying to be as strategic as we can, short of doing something more vigorous in this arena. So with that, we basically had laid out a couple of talking points, which by no means do we need to follow, but was really more like just sort of ask the council to sort of provoke response and feedback as to what is important to you and what it is that you heard tonight that speaks to you about this issue, and sort of what direction you guys want to go in. And so, we've got the data, what's the goal, what's the role of the city in filling something like that, in filling a potential gap, and where does this rank in the overall priorities of council? I know we're doing a separate process with a strategic plan with council, and so once again, this sort of falls into where does this fall into the overall aspect, and then is there other considerations that we haven't touched on tonight that you also think are relevant to the conversation that we can bring into it? And then I think part of that with the strategic planning exercise that you guys are doing is how do we deploy and implement the outcome of any conversation we have here. So with that, I'll just flip this so that for the viewing public, the other part of the slide that I just briefly touched on. So,
Who wants to start? Anybody want to start?
It's a lot. I think the data was amazing, and I think what I'm trying to figure out personally is what would a housing policy look like for Northland? Because what opportunities do we have moving forward? Because we don't have a lot of development opportunities left, right? And then with the few that we do have, do we need a policy in place to help better define what housing development in those areas might look like? And then moving forward, what does it mean for our community? So like a large amount of our housing stock is these single family homes. You know, what does a housing plan for, you know, our older dated homes look like? I'm kind of interested in what. I'm just trying to think about what opportunities do we have as a city that's really personal to us, and with the stock of housing that we have, I think is the best way to try to approach this moving forward. I don't have any answer. That's just kind of what I was trying to figure out myself.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
I'll weigh in briefly. This is the data and the information that you all provided is fantastic. Like, I feel like I've learned so much, and it's very thorough and it's really robust, so thank you, because I'm sure that it took a lot of time sifting through everything. I can only imagine. I feel like
We can show you the hidden slides. I mean, I know Alan would love to talk more about.
Some more refined than others.
Probably all now housing experts, but I feel like right now I'm really trying to process and put the pieces together and figure out how to draw conclusions, because there really is so much here. And so, I mean, I would be really interested. I mean, we've only spent an hour, or if even an hour, talking about this as a council, and I feel like I'm trying to get my head around it, and I'm not quite sure what conclusions to draw. And so I would be really interested in what some of the conclusions you all think you could have drawn from this data, because you've spent so much more time with it. And so that's one thing. Secondly is, you know, to Julie's point about opportunity and realizing that, you know, we're built out, and so when we talk about housing moving forward, it's really going to come down to accessory dwelling units and redevelopment. And so, or I mean, in the Civic Center master plan. And so I kind of want to think about housing in terms of those three areas maybe. And if we have to narrow in a little bit. And then I'm
What were the
also,
three areas again?
redevelopment, accessory dwelling unit, and Civic Center master plan. So I assume that would probably be the city-owned property.
Got it.
And I think that a policy could be really helpful, specifically moving forward and thinking about updating our new comp plan and kind of helping like feed what that could look like in the future. Because I think that we're in a different spot than we ever have been before with having a lack of vacant land. And then I'm also really interested in the ADU pilot program, because I think about one of the reasons I was really in favor of the ADUs was really providing another option for seniors who wanted to stay on their existing property but didn't want to, they're not able to take care of it in the same way that they were before. And so thinking through, if that's really our intent, is to help people age in place, how do we do that in a way that's going to empower seniors to, I guess, invest or decide that they want to jump and do that. I think the piece that I'm still a little bit stuck on is figuring out, with housing and the different options, how does that break down in terms of senior needs versus, maybe your millennial needs versus folks who are ready to, who may be retiring, and I guess it's that all stages of life, but really not understanding how that kind of fits into the data, because that to me feels like a really big indicator of what our community needs. So I'll stop there. I don't know that I'm giving you any answers, but lots of really awesome stuff here. Thank you guys so much.
Okay. Anybody else? No?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for providing this information. There's little that we can actually do, and I think we have policy in place so when opportunities arise that we can do something about it. I mean, I look at the marketplace and I look at that parking lot, north of off this depot. I'm like, you know, what an opportunity here, but we don't own this property. When you don't own property, you can just guide and direct those that want to develop. And I think we have the policy in place to do that. I think the living wage, I mean, we can't do a lot about providing housing, but we can definitely do something about providing a living wage, at least for our employees. I think that when you look at some of the, I forget, like janitorial skills, food service, this kind of stuff, it's a wonder that they're even making a living. And I know that we don't control that. Yeah, right there. When I was looking at that, I was like,
Sure.
you know, it takes 4 people working in a household to get $60,000.
Right.
And I think that's what we're hearing from our residents, at least that's, came up at a Ward 1 meeting, is the homes that have 8 to 10 people living in them. And that provides, it just snowballs into other impacts on the city. So I don't know if that's a piece that can even be included in a housing plan. I think I have the same questions as what exactly would we put in a plan when we have very little left to write decisions about. If it's not our property to develop, can we put controls on that? I don't think so.
I think for me, it's just kind of looking at what we can do on the Civic Center. I think it's like the one thing that we have some control over. In that conversation, I'm not sure that that needs to be a big plan, but a discussion and more like policy statements around it, as opposed to sinking staff time into going deeper in that. I just think about, we have conversations about their priorities and what's on their workload, and I think it's more about a statement when we have one property that we can address. That's just my feel.
That makes sense.
I think it would be a good idea possibly to look into a housing policy. I think that's a good idea to keep us guided in the right direction. I'd like ADU be a component that we have. I think we should start looking at that seriously. But this is just overwhelming. I need to digest all this information. For us that know a little bit about it, it's still overwhelming. It's a lot of information. So
We really struggled with how this is so complicated, and it is so easy to sell a narrative with the data. That was one of our biggest challenges, is how do we present something that is digestible and meaningful to a conversation. So I appreciate that, because we really did struggle mightily, because we've been working on this for a bit, and it's like it is one of the bigger challenges.
we do have opportunities like Civic Housed Area, also the last mile, the transit hubs, Civic Center. So we do have opportunities. We just need to be very careful about what we're doing.
I think, Jenny, to your comment earlier about, where does this fit into the bigger picture is kind of, I think what I was hearing is, we're looking at doing the comp plan. And I think with the strategic plan that you guys are doing is from my perspective, for planning, is really critically important to how we look and frame conversations like this. Because what we would try to do is, like, as we've done with these master plans, is strategically position the community, and to your point, Antonio, to sort of guide it down a path to say, here are the tools, please use these. What we found, and with Debbie's help, is like what really the current development market is they want you to tell them what to build, and then they'll figure out whether it meets market or not. And then from there, you work together on that, as opposed to not having a plan and the risk of not knowing what the city's going to say or do. And so, all of these exercises have been trying to build consensus with the council to say, this is our vision, and then we go out and say, here's our vision that council supports, and it brings people to the table. And I think the housing component's another layer to that. The comp plan's not the answer to the housing, but it might help put that hierarchical prioritization as to where it falls out in the overall spectrum of what the community need is, and how we go about it. I would say, and I'll let any of the other staff chime in on this, is that, with the mixed-use zoning, with the ADU, those two right now are real low-hanging fruit that I think are bearing fruit. I know that we talked about the erratum, which is the sort of what did we miss sheet. And one of the things that we'll probably be bringing back to you are unfinished basements. We're finding that people are coming in with unfinished basement type requests to turn them into potential ADUs, but we put a cap on 750 square feet. Some of these basements are 800 or 900 square feet. So do you tell them to put a wall in the corner and don't count it? Right. And more importantly, it's like, okay, but then we don't want a duplex. So that's one of the things, but I think that we're doing a lot in that effort. The PABs is another opportunity. The Reserve Project's another great example. So I wouldn't say that we're ignoring the issue. We're maximizing our value with what we're capable of doing, and it's just more of a question of how do we enhance and how does that fit into the overall hierarchy. And that's what's exciting with this retreat process and what you guys have been working toward, is that it's helping us get more focused on how we can deploy staff and resources to make these things happen.
So a point of clarification, because I'm hearing the 112th property, Carl's Farm, versus the Civic Center. It seems like we really only have control over what they build on one of those three.
You have more control than the others.
So if we put together a housing policy, would the developer have to abide by that?
That's a qualified question that it's not easy to answer. I think it's the short answer is possibly. The question then becomes is what exactly it is that you're trying to accomplish, and what's the basis that justifies you accomplishing that. And like on the private side, there's a component to it where do you have the rational nexus to say there is this gap that exists and therefore we need you to help fill it. I wouldn't say that we're there with this data. I think some of this data might suggest otherwise, but so that's one piece of it. I think with city-owned property, you clearly can control your own future on that. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think we've had some of these discussions with the Carl's Farm development, for example. So you think back to what staff presented this evening in terms of the master plans that guide, that lay out the vision for those properties and so forth. So, I mean, ultimately Civic Campus, we're the property owner, so we can create that vision. And that vision is really in place. Right now, I think it's a question of does council want to tweak it? There's the senior housing component, there's the mixed use components, part of the current vision. So then it's a matter of, well, what does it look like moving forward?
And I'll throw out there that I think part of what we're gonna be presenting to you in July, the framework of what a comp plan is, and there's a spectrum of what check a box and very robust. Then we're going to talk about, what the comp plan could be for Northglenn, and then we're going to talk about what that process looks like. Is it a council-led process? Is it a community-led process? Is it a hybrid? We'll talk about what type of procurement that we would be looking at doing this, because I think there's a couple of different ways where we might get more value. But so with that, I think what we're thinking is sub-area plans for areas. Ashley mentioned the urban center, which is Marketplace. It's the super block area Dr. Cog has designated. That could be one of our next strategic development plans that Debbie and I have talked about, where maybe you start bringing in the senior housing, the affordable or accessible, audible, whatever the terminology that we choose for that. But more importantly, it's like we can start working that into the narrative and hopefully have some basis for it that helps support it. And if not, then we say, okay, here's what we're willing to do as a community to help realize that, some of that. So I think that's part of what the comp plan aspires for, is to start heading in that direction. And then realistically, it's kind of like our roadmap for what, you know, Jason and I talk about is like that fiscal sustainability of what's the long-term health, and how does housing and population and workforce and jobs in the community all help inform, you know, our ability to maintain level of service. So ultimately, that's kind of what comp plan is going to do, but this is a piece of that. It's just really figuring out how does it fit in, and I think that kind of speaks to what you're struggling with, which is, okay, where is this in the overall arching strategy of what we want to do? And I think from our perspective, you tell us what is aspirational, and we'll tell you how we might be able to figure that out.
So is it something where, I think one of the slides he talks about affordable, attainable, accessible housing. I mean, that all sounds great. If that's a core value that the council holds, like that's what we really need, then that would be the discussion, and we would use that to drive the thinking around the Civic Center.
That is, yes, that's a possibility, for sure.
And if it's not a priority, then we don't.
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out where the discussion is, because this is a ton of information, and I really, really appreciate all the background knowledge. I just feel like there's also so many factors not in play, right? And also some things we can't control. I mean, all those graphs were trending up on every slide, and so that's just happening around the state, and no matter what we provide, if that's going to keep going, we're going to be chasing our tails. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out where the discussion is.
Okay, so I would suggest that if you guys have a desire to accomplish something, it would be helpful if, you know, you can tell us, hey, look, we think, thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Guide us.
So I think that these are the three, like, very straightforward, but I think where you're going is like, okay, when we're talking about strategic planning, you know, how far of the onion do we want to peel, and what does that really look like? It's tough at this level of where we're at in this process. It's really tough to sort of articulate that. I don't know if any of you guys have thoughts to weigh in.
Yeah, well, I think that we could look at the tools that we currently have and ways to bolster them, if that's the direction of council. I think if you want us to take a stab at drafting a housing policy, that makes me nervous without having a housing expert, because when we were going over the data, every one of us interpreted it differently in what was going on. And so we could draft a policy, but we don't know what the implications would be. So if we were going to go that direction, I would say we should really look at bringing in an expert that can guide us through that process and tell us, this is what these numbers mean, and this is where your gaps are, and this is the policy that could be potentially the most beneficial, and here's how it could impact the community or development. So, or we could do nothing.
But I think timing is important
layers
too.
of doing nothing, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marcy, but you had said that we could have like a smaller piece, like we could make a statement about this is what we desire.
Yeah.
And that would be a little more than nothing, but a little less than big, yes.
So, and Ashley, help me out here, but I think that's essentially what Thornton's approach is they have a policy statement that is largely aspirational, but doesn't say you shall, must, will do X, Y, or Z. I think in the case of Westminster, theirs is city-owned specific efforts. And
They're all a mall area that
Right.
they have the policy for.
Right. And you see, the thing for me, and I think for Becky, is that we both worked in mountain towns, which is an entirely different dynamic. So it's really about, you know, your workforce can't afford to provide the workforce. So what do you do? So from that contrast to here, I think it's a little bit more nuanced, as really what we're doing is that are we trying to ensure that we remain a diverse community that services all different types of demographics, socioeconomically and culturally, and so that's a different, bend on the conversation. But I think it kind of speaks to sort of the underlying theme of what I've heard from council through various conversations over the last several months about this subject. So, but yeah, I mean. Like for instance, like with the Civic campus, the way I look at it is part of the messaging for Civic campus was, can it help pay for itself? And what's the highest and best use? And what's that best use look like in order to help subsidize future phase development for a new city hall and perhaps the existing or the proposed rec center? Well, we said, active senior living, which by the way is very, profitable and market ready. But if we're talking about trying to keep folks living in Northglenn who are already on fixed incomes and putting them there, well, the question then becomes we can say that, but then what are the implications to the goals and objectives that also were in play when we first put that together? And as council, you guys can change your mind. It's perfectly okay. But what we attempt to do is to help you guys make that decision in a strategic way. So to your point about, well, what can we control and what we can't, I think it's a matter of what is important to you, and then how do we provide the context to help you make that decision. So, like I said, I think it's kind of an esoteric and philosophical level of conversation right now, but it's really more about like, hey, we think this is really important and this is what we should focus on. A couple of the takeaways that I took from the data is that it seems like our rental income living wage population is more challenged than, say, our owner-occupied property. And perhaps maybe that's where part of the focus is, and that's why I've stopped and flipped back, because it seems like there's a disconnect when we look at our census tract data and some of the data that we got from the bike ped, where our concentration of poverty income is, and understanding why that isn't being utilized. So perhaps it's more like working more with Unison and really trying to understand. I can tell you that a few years ago, Unison put an option on the 5 acres. It's now the 112th Village Station, and it didn't pencil because the on-site infrastructure costs were too much. It didn't make financial sense.
So a couple final questions that I still have is, and I guess going off of what you were just talking about, is how do we explore partnerships with the county or other regional entities? What does that look like? What does it look like to work with Unison more? I know that, so like you said, we only have 179 Section 8 vouchers. I mean, is there any way that you could increase that, or like what does that look like? And then another question, which I had somewhere. What does, and what I'm trying to think of is if we were to come up with like a policy or a strategic plan or whatever it is we're going to come up with, what does residential redevelopment look like for us? Because, our housing stock is older and the needs of American families have changed, right? We added a 3rd child to our house, and that drastically changed how I need my house to be. And so as we're thinking about, meeting the needs of not just today, but like future families, because that's what we are. We're a family focused, we like to keep that kind of character among us. Like, what does that look like? And how does policy impact how residential redevelopment happens in the city? Those are just two of my statements.
I just want to weigh in this a little bit. So I totally agree with most of the sentiment about we don't have that much left for opportunities, so I'm not really seeing where this comes into play. I'm not sure that I agree with a policy, because I am afraid I don't want to limit, well, let's say I would agree with a policy that didn't limit a developer coming in and saying, oh, well, you can't do this there, and then the developers walk away because they don't find that very attractive and they want to do what they want to do. So somehow there has to be, has to come we have to meet in the middle somewhere there. I'm also not sure where you move from here with us, so I think it's a big discussion and probably needs to be ongoing, and we are having another discussion on the 10th, yes.
We
no?
have part 2 slated for the 17th, and our hope was to really get a feel for what your thoughts are as we're having this discussion to figure out and frame what part 2 looks like. If it's timely and appropriate to do that, we may need more time, based on where we end up with the discussion tonight.
I personally don't feel the need to jump on it because I don't see anything that's right in the near future that we have to address. So I think it's something to keep on the back burner, but I'm not sure that I would want staff to move forward and spend a lot of time looking into it. So that's my 2 cents.
So it's still on the housing topic, but I just want to circle back some of that residential redevelopment question. Can you just remind me, so we had it in DC and there was like seed money that got that program started, and then can you just remind me where it ended, why it went away?
So I may have to look to some of the existing council on this for some of the history, because that was a before Brook program.
So I was part of the committee with them, but I honestly was kind of stepping away when they dissolved, and so I just really don't remember why it went away. And the reason I'm asking is just because at some point I think they were just starting to gain momentum in having some of the floor plans and some of the development that was happening, and they were starting to have residents that were inquiring and using those plans, which goes to that tune of the architecture drawings and being able to get some of that going. But then the going away, Joyce.
And then there was also the issue that council was actually supplementing.
Yeah.
And
I thought
was
that's what it was,
the
but I didn't want
decision
to
of
say it.
council, that they decided at that point that they could not fund it anymore.
So I think as it's been explained to me, is that the redevelopment commission was really designed to be a net neutral, break-even venture, where the city had a nonprofit that went out and did fix and flip. And I'm oversimplifying this because I know it's way more complicated, but I'm trying to, as you know, not get in the weeds. And I think the challenge is that it wasn't penciling in, that it is a subsidized effort. Now, interestingly, when I came on board, Brothers Redevelopment was doing our minor home repair, and we were working with a similar group that we have up here, the Elevation Community Land Trust. It was a similar group like them, where they basically will go out and buy distressed properties and do essentially an upgrade, but then sell it at a reduced market rate. And what we were seeing is from those experiences that I had with those groups, is that it's 40 to 60% haircut on every single property, and that was back in 2012 when the market was still sort of skipping on the bottom, because you're really looking at at basically subsidizing it to put that person in a home. Habitat for Humanity, a lot of the labor that they get is volunteer and donation, which makes it equitable because they're paying for material in the land. So it's the business model component to that nonprofit, is that most of those, from what my experience has been, maybe others have different perspective on this, is simply that you're doing it at a loss every time, and that's why you're doing it, is for that purpose.
We did an actual tour. There was 11 houses here in Northglenn that you said. And I mean, those houses were immaculate when they were done. All new appliances, everything was redone. Windows, doors, everything. It looked like a brand new house.
And we have a home down on Leroy Drive that they totally remodeled, which is awesome. So yeah, we did a great job.
I didn't really get the part of, because I don't think that it's up to taxpayers to subsidize renovating somebody's house. I really get that. But I think that instead of the program going away completely, what probably would have been better is to seek out means of being able to keep some of the programming going, like the architectural support and some of those things that become cost barriers to residents who would be funding the renovations on their own.
finding some way to be able to maybe reinvent that a little bit. I could get
So-
behind looking at that.
The CDBG funds that we have, the county does a minor home repair program. And when I first started, it was a Northglenn program that we did that the county at the time took issue with. It was also very limited. We only made it available for $3,500. After a couple of efforts, we had a new program that we elevated to about $7,500. I think it was $700 or $7,500 per household. And honestly, and that was because that was by design, because we wanted to be able to spread the financial resources, about $200K a year, to as broad a group of people as possible. What I experienced through that exercise was we were essentially doing triage on people that desperately needed it, and it was getting to the point where somebody needed a grab bar in their bathroom, but the entire floor was rotted out. And so, oh, and by the way, the furnace doesn't work and the roof leaks. And so the prioritization of that became a real challenge. The maximum that you can do on an individual home is $24,999 through CDBG without having to go through a higher level of bureaucracy. Where the other challenge that we had with their minor home repair program is they wanted to run it, and in doing so, they would have taken 70% off of our allocation for administrative costs, which I can tell you is completely justifiable, but it cuts into the pie. And I honestly think that if the goal with CDBG funds in that regard is to keep people in their homes, you need to be spending $20,000 with a $5,000 contingency to really make a meaningful difference. Well, that means you're only granting 3 or 4 a year. So how do you do that? Well, under the county's program, it's first come, first serve. And so there's an equity issue there that's been a challenge. But that's kind of the struggle.
No, I get that. And I think it's just the difference of what we're talking about. I mean, using Julie's scenario, now they got 3 kids, and it's like, do I add an addition, or how do I stay there at a different level and reinvent the house, so to speak? And it's like more of the folks who were looking at popping the top and making expansions as opposed to the CDBG programs and the programs that Brothers was involved in. I really get the distinction between the two.
Yeah.
So then NABC was also a nonprofit.
Right.
The issue from council was they didn't want to give
I get that.
budget amount of money to a nonprofit, so there was some issues that way,
There was a philosophy.
There was, yes, yeah. But also, a few years ago, we did bring Brothers in, and they were actually have a program that would assist people to get into some of the apartments, and so, because they couldn't afford to come in for a variety of reasons, if it was what background checks or whatever it might be. It was convincing the apartment owners, and it's convincing the owners of the property that rent, and they didn't want to do it. I mean, they don't have to do it. We can't regulate them to do it, and so those are some of the issues also that we have to face in order to do this.
Any other thoughts? I don't want to I know.
I think the only thing I would say is there is an urgency, but the market is going to start moving on us very quickly here at Civic Center, and so I like the fact that you don't have a policy that hamstrings these developers, but maybe a statement, a policy statement. That was a good thought, because it actually encourages the developers to know where we stand, and that we encourage housing and quality housing. And so whatever the council's strategy is around the housing, it is kind of nice to have that in your back pocket when you're going out and marketing to the developers, so that they understand what you're doing. For instance, on Westminster's, they've got that policy, which is 40%, which that's a lot. And so developers who might want to bring a different product there that could be very successful, they can't do it there, right, because of the policy that they've set. But having a guiding principle or a guiding high-level piece, I think, would be really helpful in actually attracting quality developers. So.
And one thing that I'll throw out there is that affordable housing component can also cut both ways, because then that means for that developer to make their margin, they have to increase the unit price of the other housing product that they're providing on the same site, which then creates, the potential of bringing in a disparate aspect to where can the market actually bear that increased cost to help make their margin on the subsidized housing costs. So then what happens is they come to the city and say, you need to help us make up the difference. And that's what I think Debbie's getting at, is that, if it's more policy and not prescriptive in policy, then it helps us get more creative and flexible. So.
I think historically, just in the last few months, you can see that council is very open and flexible to input from staff and input from the community about a lot of the development. So maybe a statement, when I said policy, I didn't know what that really meant. I mean, it was kind of like maybe it is a guiding statement more than anything else. But I think this council is very open to being flexible and wanting the best, so.
Okay, you have what you need from us?
Yeah.
Well, I'll summarize and you jump in here, Brooke. We've heard a desire for a policy, but I think that discussion has circled to Civic campus as one site, because we own it, that we have opportunity to develop some type of statement for the property. I think we have the current master plan for the site. Staff, we can go back to it, and given the path that we're on with Civic Campus, there's going to be an intersecting point here over the next several months leading into 2020 to where we can better define a statement for the property. I think there's been a desire expressed for taking a bit of a deeper dive into some of these areas, like what does residential redevelopment look like for Northglenn, and I think that could naturally tie into the comprehensive plan discussion. I know that in prior discussions with council and with NERA, there's been mention of the Washington Street corridor and what opportunity do we have with that area, and I think naturally that would probably be an area of our city that would come out in the comprehensive planning process as opportunity to do some type of sub-regional planning. So I think there's a lot of tools out there. With that brief summary, jump in, Brooke. And so I think Civic Campus is the natural, more immediate where we can head in the short term. And so if I haven't summarized appropriately, jump in here now and tell us no, different direction.
So I'm just going to comment more than anything else. I think you summarized it fine. But a few years ago, we did sit down many sessions and talk about which properties would be next for redevelopment. I think we need to be pulling those plans out, taking a look at them, because Washington Street was part of that. Also, there was the Huron Center, but it was south of the center.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that we talked about. Don't want to really discuss them right now, but I think we really need to pull those plans out and take a look at what we've got.
And actually, Debbie caught me on the hall on that point about what's the next step underneath the comp plan, and what does that look like, and how, and what's that really sort of robustness, and yeah, so we have that same thought process.
So just to clarify, for Civic Center, we're going to move forward with drafting a statement sooner rather than later.
Yeah, if I can do this, if I can touch base with staff and follow up to this meeting, and we can talk more about the timeline of where we're at with the EPA assessment work, and then figuring out, based on prior discussions where this piece fits in, I'll be better prepared to give you more of an exact, this is how it's gonna go. moving forward, if that's okay with council. I don't want to create an expectation and then change it tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was very enlightening, as everybody said. It was very good information, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next item is a budget update on the Northland Civic Center project. Now, normally, we would have provided council with our regular monthly update, but because of the Memorial Day holiday, we had a meeting canceled, pushed it forward, so that's why we've got Amanda here tonight, who's going to provide us with this update on the schematic design budget, and she's going to go into a little bit more detail because of where we're at with the schematic design budget, moving into the design development phase of things.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Amanda Peterson, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. As Heather said, we are kind of combined the May and June regular updates because of the holiday. So we met right in the middle, which happened to be a study session night. Since the last update, we've really spent a significant amount of time working through the process to reach that initial guaranteed maximum price with a goal of aligning the available budget with what we have in the drawings and making sure that those two things match with one another. Staff and the rest of the team we've made it very clear that there is a defined budget of $53 million for the entire project and $42 million including $42 million in hard costs. The preliminary estimate that we received from FCI, and keep in mind that this estimate, because of the timing of when we brought FCI on, the initial schematic design happened with the architect and the team based on concept, and then FCI came in when that was finished and provided a cost estimate. And so those cost estimates didn't completely line up with each other. BRS, as they went through the design process, were applying cost factors to that, but when the contractor did theirs, they didn't line up. So there were a couple of different things that we really looked at. I would say even though we looked at probably hundreds of line items, and they ranged in cost from literally a few $100s in a reduction to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on what the item was. But I would say as we went through that exercise to get us from about $47.5 million down to the $42 million, the reductions really ended up falling into a few different main categories. The first one, and really the easiest, were aligning some differences between what FCI was pricing and what BRS had drawn. So there were some things that as we just held discussions and went through that first review, BRS had drawn X, FCI interpreted it as Y, and we needed to bring those pricing together, and in some cases that was a significant reduction in and of itself. Once we got those all kind of adjusted accordingly, we made sure everybody was speaking the same language, then we started looking at kind of some of the more difficult conversations. Of those, another major category was the size of the building. So during the concept phase, we had assigned an approximate square footage to each of the different proposed and accepted uses of the building. And during the schematic design phase, some of those square footages creeped up. So that was the next step, was to pull those square footages back in line with what was in the concept plan. And some of that happens based on adjacencies or what's on an upper and a lower floor and things aligning with one another. Most of those reductions were architects do amazing things visually with spaces, but were slices of the building because it had to can't just take out a room or a piece of a room because it impacts all the things that are surrounding it. So most of them were slices that went either all the way through one floor from north to south or east to west, or through both floors in the same location. ones that we ended up agreeing to, most of them were taken out of corridor spaces. So reducing, say, a 10-foot corridor to a 9-foot corridor. Still within the code requirements, still within a functional use of the space, but a reduced space from what was originally included on the drawings. There were also some 1 to 2 foot slices removed from some individual program areas, including the pool, the gymnasium, and the theater. Now, none of those were from the active use of that space, so it wasn't from the swimming pool, the water, it was from the deck that surrounds it, and adjustments then that are made from there. The largest single reduction was in the weight room, and that reduced that space by about 10 feet in width because it had the most significant overage compared to what was originally presented in the concept plan. That did allow for the raised track to shift over and basically have less elevation, which is less expensive. And so the track is now anticipated to go partially through that raised above the gym and partially around the weight room. We will provide you with updated drawings as we get through the end of the design development phase. But at the point of this update, we don't have those yet because we still have to go through that design development phase where they will actually incorporate all of those modifications as well as all the additional detail into the updated drawings. Some other adjustments that were made, and these are things that are going to happen throughout design development as well, are looking at allowances that are provided for, say, lighting fixtures. So they've taken the initial estimate takes, okay, lighting fixtures, they're not designed yet. We haven't picked what fixtures they are. We haven't determined where those fixtures are. We haven't determined any of that detail. So it's just saying, here's about how much lighting should cost for a building of this size. So we looked at each of those that were an allowance, lighting, countertops, cabinetry, and we reevaluated that to pull those down to what seemed like a more appropriate level based on longevity and long-term function and the cost that it would be to include those. So one example of that is things like there was a higher-end Corian countertop product initially spec'd throughout the building. Keep in mind, we haven't looked at any actual countertops yet, just here's the allowance of we can afford this level of countertop. We've reduced that so that it's still assumed it would be a hard surface countertop that just is a grade or 2 or 10 below that, still providing us the function, the longevity, and the durability that we need for that facility. Some of the other areas that we made adjustments, there were a few amenities where we made minor adjustments where I don't even think staff will notice them once the facility is ready and open. And these were things we had to ask the architects for more detail, for a point of comparison. Things like they proposed reducing the slide length by 20 feet. And we kind of looked at it and went, I don't know, you tell me. But they did an assessment of other facilities in this region as well as others they had worked on. We said, well, what's the average slide length? Tell me if 20 feet is a large amount or a small amount. Well, it turns out that even without 20 feet, we're still within the industry standard for a recreational slide length in a pool, in a leisure pool. So that helped us be able to say, yes, that's an acceptable change to potentially make.
When you're talking about that, how much does 20 feet of slide actually make a difference in money?
It was, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was a significant figure.
Really?
Yes.
It's amazing. Okay.
It was a good sized chunk. It was enough that they did the work to tell us if it was worth doing.
Okay.
Some other pieces we took things like the stairs that go into the lap pool, and they're a little narrower than what we originally had anticipated. We evaluated equipment types from what type of elevator, what brand of elevator, what are we speccing that we want in this space, and what might be a more cost-effective way to achieve the same outcomes. As we went through this value engineering exercise, care was really taken to, as I said before, make sure that we were still meeting the needs that we've heard from all of you, from all the public, and from staff, because we want to be able to provide a facility that's going to last in the long run, that's going to serve our needs without cutting corners. And we feel like that what we've provided will do that. We did not remove any amenities from the space. And I think from what most of you will see are drawings that look very similar. They're minor shifts as we go from schematic design to the design development phase. There is one significant reduction that we hope is just temporary. At the beginning of this project, we had identified an intention to seek grant funding to the amount of about $1 million. We think that we have a strong grant request. It's not a guarantee, but the item on our Civic campus, or on the new facility, that we think makes the most sense for a grant ask is the improvements to the festival lawn, the senior patio, and the pool patio. Those are outdoor improvements. Those are items that can be easily kind of pulled aside from the remainder of the project and allowing the design to move forward. They don't impact, it's not like taking out, if you were to take out a lane of the swimming pool, you can't just put it back in 3 months. Once you take it out, it's gone. That reduction has been made. With this, our intention is to build exactly what we designed originally, but we need some additional funding to be able to do so. We intend to submit that grant application to Adams County Open Space this fall. It is due on July 22nd, I believe. We will plan to bring forward a resolution that can show your support for that grant ask, as is required by by Adams County at the end of June. So I think I'm looking at the June 24th council meeting to do that.
Would there be a part for partial development of that, or the grant, or
So-
would that fulfill the entire project?
If we were to receive the grant as we plan to request it, it would be to do everything outdoors as was initially, or as was presented to you in this schematic design process.
So if they decided to just fund us partially, we could go again?
We'd have a couple, so same options would still apply. Our options really would be that we do less of a project, so we reevaluate, determine if we can do less based on the dollars that we have available, both what we would put in as our match dollars and whatever funding we received. We could go back during a second grant cycle, which is a common practice. We could seek other funding, which is difficult. We'd probably be better off spending our time reapplying for funding than potentially seeking out other grant sources that we're not as familiar with or don't have as small of a pool that they're awarding to. There is, with Adams County Open Space, the only entities that can apply for those projects are Parks and Recreation organizations who are providing those services in Adams County. So the applicant pool is smaller. Right now, they do have funding that is in excess of the grant awards they've given out during the last couple of cycles. So that works in our favor as well. And like I said, part of the reason for choosing this is even though indoor recreation amenities are acceptable uses of those grant funds, it's not something that this particular granting board has shown to be favorable. And so we want to make sure that we're providing a grant ask that we can tell a story about, that we can provide good supporting documentation for, and that we believe upholds what the grant board is seeking.
Thank you.
A couple other things just that I wanted to add to that. Along with that grant request, we will be doing some additional public outreach, seeking letters of support from our community to support what we already heard during the former public engagement processes. And certainly we will keep council updated on our progress on those grant asks. The timing for the grant ask, they said we'll turn it in this fall. It's usually a 2 to 3 month process. By October or November, we usually know if we've been awarded funding and at what amount. Sometimes takes another month or so after that for the county commissioners to make the official award. Any questions on the grant process or some of what we have pulled out of the project? There were a few additions made during this process as well. Those dollar figures are incorporated into these amounts. It's not in addition. But the most significant one was the design had called for a slab-on-grade foundation for about 2/3 of the building, which isn't an unusual approach. However, there is some risk associated with it in terms of movement of the building. I believe it allowed for up to 1 inch of movement from one end to the other over time. We did make a decision to ask that be changed to a slab on void or a structural slab. And I believe we're actually leaning towards the structural slab at this point because the cost difference was almost negligent between those two. It was about a $350,000 cost difference between the slab on void and the slab on grade or the structural slab. But they come with much less risk long-term for the structural stability of the building. So the preliminary cost estimate, we still have about a $700,000 gap between where we want to be and where we're currently at. However, that it's not atypical at this stage in the process, we are told. And we've already identified, or I shouldn't say I haven't identified any of them, because an architect and a contractor should do that, not me. But between the architect and the contractor, they've identified another approximately $700,000 in potential reductions. They're not things we can say yes to yet. We need to be further along in the design process before we can get to that level of detail. And some of those are as simple as the estimate of exactly how much of a material. So at this point, we haven't selected a material. We don't know the exact quantity of it, and the timing is a variable in there as well. So as we get through design development, there is less variability in those, and we can get a better estimate, which will tighten those numbers up as well. We anticipate that we will be able to reach the $42 million target by the end of the design development phase, which is here in another 6 to 8 weeks or so. At that point, we will bring forward to you a review of the design development documents, so you'll get to see the updated drawings as well as an updated budget or cost estimate for the project, just like we did with the schematic design process. Other items that we've been working on this month include the preliminary review of the design development set by fire and building for code compliance. Review and submission of zoning and plating has come before you over the last month or so. Continued review of our child care licensing requirements so we can make sure that our built space matches the expectations of the state licensing program. Continued refinement of individual workstation needs for staff, and continued refinement of our theater technical needs. The next design development workshop with staff will be this Thursday, so we'll spend about another 8 hours hanging out together going through that detail. And then the next council update is scheduled for Monday, July 22nd. With that, I'm happy to take any questions. Questions from anyone?
Thank you. This is a big project. That's a lot of work, so.
We're having fun doing it, and we're excited to see it come together here, hopefully with a groundbreaking out there in just a few months.
Thank you for cutting corners without cutting amenities, because that was really important. So appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right. This is you, Heather, Resident Recognition Program Criteria Discussion.
Okay, so I had a request to add this to the council agenda, and I thought that there was a page saved. So let me just do this real quick. Oh, did they do it as a screen?
There was a web page open, residential program. I closed it, I'm sorry.
Oh, Brooke.
I
Okay.
thought we opened it and then we had
Let me just pull this up real quick.
It's a test.
it. I know.
Pulled it that fast, sweet.
For demerits.
Okay.
I saw resident and I thought, oh, that's residential, and that's something we had of, so.
Okay, so what we're going to discuss tonight is back when I presented the resident recognition program to all of you, when I designed the program, I kept the criteria very open and loose with the intent of it being a grassroots program that residents would participate in. Since this time, we've recognized 4 residents through the program. We did receive 4 nominations recently, 2 of whom are individuals sitting on council currently. And so the question for council's consideration tonight is whether or not to change the criteria to where sitting council members would not be eligible for to receive the recognition. I have reached out to both of those council members who were nominated and given them a heads up about that. I think a lot of the feedback that I've been given thus far in this discussion that's just taken place over the last few days is that those council members would likely not accept that type of nomination and want to receive that recognition as we're recognizing other individuals, residents within our community. So that's one main component of what I've was asked to have discussed tonight. So with that, I'll open up that piece for discussion.
Well, I didn't hear from you, so it obviously wasn't me. No, I that's interesting. I guess I made an assumption that it was only kind of for civilians, you know, people that weren't currently in this role. I'm guessing whoever it was is well deserving of that recognition. So, where are the? I didn't even
Here's
see
the
this
criteria
page.
right here. This is the page on the site. We have our logo, program logo that we pulled together using the 50th anniversary logo. And the 3 criteria that we have outlined here has made significant contributions to improve the quality of life of others, improved and or positively affected the lives and living conditions of individuals within our community, and then gone above and beyond to make a difference in their community and inspire others to give back.
Oh, I bet there's people on council that have done that. I guess I just wonder about the optics of it is the only thing.
So I'm just wondering, I mean, the purpose of this program was to recognize the residents.
Correct.
That was my assumption.
Yes, and when I created the program, I did not foresee that level of detail, so.
Right, so maybe we just have to spell that out a little more. I think it's, the only thing for me in it is I think it's difficult to find the residents because usually they don't tell you what they've done.
Yeah.
You know, so it's very difficult to find those, you know, so coming up with criteria or finding a friend to nominate them. I don't know how to go about this. I think this is something that we have to put some thought into, you know, but, and I'm sure you are, but I think it's for the residents.
I've had Heather Grady's actually overseas right now, so we've been having some texting conversations, and I've had her send me some information on what we've done thus far to market the program, and we have been doing a lot in terms of outreach through connection, newsletter, social media, word of mouth. A couple additional pieces that we have not yet done that I would offer, and I think I would assume all of you would be supportive of taking these next steps, is doing some type of Facebook video to where we have maybe a couple of you or some residents talk about how easy it is to get online and submit a nomination and our overall goals with the program. I will be going to the Citizens Affairs Board on Wednesday evening with Brooke And so that'll be an opportunity where I can pitch the program to Citizens Affairs Board. I know that we have information of all board and commissioners, and so we'll continue to do a push with them and pushing out information to them. I've asked staff who serve as liaisons to different boards and commissions to make sure they're reminding and pitching the program through those outlets as well. So, I think overall we didn't really set, and I did not set by the end of the year we want to recognize X number of individuals. I think, it's our 50th year. Can we get to 50? I think that would be great.
So is it designed just for Northglenn residents though? Because we have a lot of people that live in other communities that actually do quite a bit in the city of Northland. So I'm just wondering how that would sit. But recognizing people that are actually providing volunteer services in the city.
I think that's a great question, Joyce. I think the program was designed for residents, but since we're having this discussion, if there's a desire to go ahead and broaden it a bit, I don't see why that would be inappropriate to do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, if that's something that we want to add into the program at this point.
I like the residents idea. I'm just wondering, can staff and/or council nominate people? I mean, because we have a lot of staff members that work side by side with residents.
I do. It's of my opinion that I really didn't want this to be a staff-driven process. We have had council members nominate, so I mean that's happening naturally. I think it's some of it is have we gotten the word out enough? Maybe not. I mean, I can tell you that in each edition of the Connection newsletter, we have had an advertisement about it, and we're acknowledging those individuals. So in June's Connection that just dropped recently, you'll see the two individuals that recently received the recognition, Jerry Gavette and Pastor Kim Scadam. So we're trying to couple that to really reinforce the program, but I'm definitely open to other ideas and ways to help get the word out.
Maybe also approach some of our volunteer organizations like CPAN. I mean, I think that there's like a long list of people that come from that membership base that would be, that maybe they would internally, they could nominate some people. I think that would be good. I think too, just to be honest, I think giving some examples of things that people might do. I mean, I think those are very clear, but when we're having the conversation and we're going to CPAN or we're going to the seniors and we're suggesting, I think sometimes they think that to nominate someone, it has to be an extreme accomplishment or something that they've done in the community. And I think sometimes they forget just their volunteer hours alone is a contribution. Or things that they do to help their neighbors is a contribution. And so maybe just priming it a little bit with some ideas would help them say, oh yeah, I think of Susie down the street and make that nomination.
Does it say anywhere that it has to be adults?
No, and Heather Grady and I have actually talked about that. We've had that discussion in particular with youth commissioners and other fabulous youth that we have in our community that we know have been highlighted either through Adams 12 5-star school programming or other interests that they have. So that, yeah, there's not a limit based on age.
And it's not the greatest timing. Oh, sorry. It's not the greatest timing, but I mean, we have a lot of our residents that get involved with the schools, and maybe if maybe this fall it would be a good time to hit them up and say, you know, who do you have that come in, and especially at the STEM schools. I mean, they have a lot of our residents who are also business owners who make a lot of contribution to be involved in the ADLs and give back to the schools.
Thanks. Yes, a couple of things. One is on the elected officials piece for current city council members. I think that every single one of us
does a lot of work, and I hope that we're recognized when our term is up or when we're departing from council, and I think that's a little bit more appropriate of a time to celebrate individual council members, because I really love the idea of just focusing in on the other residents, and I prefer to keep it just to Northland residents. The other two things are, I really am feeling what Marcy is saying in terms of the criteria feels really unattainable, because a lot of the folks that I want to nominate, you know, haven't lived in Northland their entire lives, and you know, making significant contributions. I can't read the whole thing up there. It just feels like a really high bar, and I wanna nominate and celebrate the mom whose child is on the autism spectrum, and she takes him to our local parks and has conversations about, you know, what their family is experiencing. And I want to celebrate the man who walks around Reservoir who picks up trash, and some of the folks that are often unsung heroes of Northglenn. Like, I think that there are a lot of usual suspects. But I want to think through how we dig in and actually find more folks that may not think of themselves as you know, needing recognition. The other thing I've really struggled with in terms of this program is feeling like there's no process. So someone is nominated and then we just recognize them. Is that just what happens? Like, we just send through a nomination and then we say, okay, great, we call them up. They come to the next council meeting, we recognize them? Is that it?
The nominations come through the website and they go to Jenny Murphy, who's our volunteer coordinator, and certainly she knows members of her community pretty well, given her length of service to the organization. So then she shares those with Heather Grady, and unless there's a major red flag, I mean, it is a pretty fluid process that those individuals who are being nominated definitely come with quite a bit of narrative about the contributions they've made. So we have not had a nomination come through that has caused us to pause or question whether or not the submission is worthy of recognition. So, you know, when I designed the program, I was very intentional about trying to keep it simplified, not only for all of you, but also for staff. So, you know, certainly there's different ways to approach process, and if there's a desire by council to have a different process, you know, certainly I want to hear that feedback from all of you this evening and guidance on what you'd want that process to look like, different from the process we have today.
Heather, can you tell me what you would consider to be a red flag? Right, because I'm asking, I mean, if somebody who, you know, maybe ran for office and wasn't elected was nominated.
No, that would not be a red flag. I think it would be if we're aware that there's some type of criminal behavior that was like in the public purview that was well known, that sort of thing. But again, you know, you try to anticipate as much as possible when you design a program, but at the same time try to keep it open enough to where it's not so restrictive. So that has not come up, and if it did come up, that would cause us to pause. We'd have an internal discussion. If it was something that I would need to bring to council's attention, I would bring it to council's attention, but it just hasn't happened.
I like the idea of either adding or, I don't know, making it not so intense. Or maybe you just add a bullet that says, is kind of an unsung hero, or is quietly going about their business, improving our community. I don't know how you would phrase that, but I like that idea. I would say as long as somebody's reading it and at least doing a general check, because we don't want to be caught celebrating someone who has done something and then we're going to look really stupid. I'm guessing you're getting a lot of high quality ones, which is awesome. The ones we've had so far are amazing. So I love the idea.
So my question is, so you said we've only celebrated 4 residents, right, so far?
We've received 4 nominations, and those 4 individuals have been recognized. And then we received 4 additional nominations, 2 of whom are sitting council members, so the other 2 will be brought forward to be
Okay, so we'll be
recognized
up
on
to
June 24th.
Okay, so we'll be up to 6. So, I don't know, I think it would be kind of exciting to set a goal and to figure out how we could get there. I love the idea of this program. I think it's great. I think that, you know, we all could be doing more to get more nominations in. And so I really just want to see this program really successful. So just keep us posted on how it's going and how we could keep doing more nominations. And I think I really like to see it successful. Go ahead.
Chomping at the bit there.
My 2 cents is that I don't want to politicize the program. So council is excluded, their family members should be excluded, and any elected official who is currently serving excluded. If they were a former representative, a former governor, or a former something, that's fine. But while they're in office, they be excluded. Council members of their families, and elected officials. That's my 2 cents.
Go ahead.
So I agree with the city council members, but I disagree with city council members and family members or anything like that. I mean, I just don't think that's, I'm gonna shut up before you say something, that's fine.
Yeah, I also don't understand the family members. That seems strange to me. I definitely agree and don't think that any of us would expect to be recognized. I never would have. And had I been, I would have turned it down. It was always about the residents, the little guys that were doing little things. Totally agree with you. I've said it on the dais that we want more people that are just the people that are taking out a senior's trash or something like that. I did reach out to Kate Fisher with the senior center, and she said she was definitely, she goes, boy, I have so many. And I said, well, since we aren't getting any, or not, we're not getting any, but we're not getting a lot, if you could start putting in some names. And she said she would get on that also. So, yeah, I think, but council does need to step up too. And if you know somebody that you feel should get it, I think you nominate them. And probably those are a little too high-reaching of goals there. It should just be that normal resident that just does great things for other people in the community. They don't have to be an elected official or somebody on a board or commission. It's just that nice person in your neighborhood. That's kind of what it was about for me, so.
So based on that feedback, I'm going to change the language on the criteria on the website. So I'll remove the word significant and really get to more of the heart of what we've discussed tonight about those unsung heroes in our community that have made contributions, whether small or large. So we'll tweak that language and then make more of a push with our board and commissions and encouraging nominations. I've heard a couple different things, so I need consensus on basically excluding council from receiving recognition and or excluding council and family members. So the first thing that I heard was excluding council from being eligible to receive the recognition.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't agree though to penalize the family. There might be some family members that really get out there and do some really wonderful things in the community. I don't think we should penalize.
Well, we're penalizing them.
But it is penalizing them for not.
No, it's not.
Yes, it's just, that's my opinion. You know.
Yeah, okay. But
So.
from my perspective, I don't see it as penalizing anybody. I think that when you serve in public office, your family and your family members are you. You represent them.
I represent them
Yes,
as a
but I mean-
resident. not as, they don't represent me, I don't represent them. I mean, you know.
So I just look at once again, the optics of it, like, and I think it was, like, because our family members aren't allowed to work for the city.
Part-time.
Part-time? I don't know. I was told not at all.
Part-time.
Because I have a
Seasonal.
part-time worker.
Seasonal. So, anyway.
Well, I'm gonna have to call now because I was told
Better
my
get your-
children could not work at the city while I was in office. So that to me was that kind of that curtain. But I know we have a lot of family members that volunteer, and Marcy, your mom's at a lot of events, and definitely worthy of that. So I don't know. I'm kind of back and forth on it. I just don't want it to look bad.
Right.
If we have thousands of residents, but we're narrowing ourselves to a pool that's connected to people in power, so to speak. Does that make sense? I mean, to me, it's just how it looks to others. I still, you know, I mean, just to use your mom as an example, I think she's definitely worthy. I just wouldn't want that to look bad.
The only way
or
that
like
would
it
look
was
bad is
playing
if she did it,
favorites.
if she nominated her mom. To me, that would look bad. If I nominated my family,
No,
if you,
but
it's an
I'm not
agenda.
saying
No,
she
it's an
shouldn't.
agenda, and it's interesting, yeah, I'm gonna just bow down out of it. If it comes from a resident that really enjoys her mother and notices that I don't understand why, then we exempt family members from receiving. Just doesn't make sense, so.
I think we look at the criteria and if it's a family member or not. Maybe you may not even know it's a family member, you know?
That's true.
Yeah, so I think you should broaden it. I mean, you know, I know none of my family members are gonna get an award, I know.
Come on, I was
that.
gonna
But I
nominate
mean-
Jack.
Well, he just
I
puts up
just
with
don't want
me,
it
you
to
know?
be perceived favoritism, but if that's, because I don't know.
I don't, yeah.
And it may
that's
not
another
be.
conversation,
I
guess.
think you have to avoid the appearance.
You have to
Evil,
avoid the
favoritism, or whatever adjective you want to put in there. It appears as though, and I think you need to avoid that. I think that's all of our responsibilities.
I think at this point, you better just try to get consensus, because it's obvious we disagree on this.
So the second piece of this, if I can see by a show of hands, how many council members are in support of excluding family members from receiving the recognition? Okay. So it was discussed that there's a desire not to include family members if they're nominated in receiving the recognition. So if you are in support of excluding family members of council members to receive the recognition, can you show me your hands? So that way I can see who. Okay. And those that are in I think I'm okay with it. We have a lot of residents.
Yeah.
And those who are in support of including family members in recognition. So that's a 4-3, so the direction that I have is to exclude family members as part of the program criteria. The other thing that got brought up was a goal, so unless council feels otherwise, I'll use recognition of striving to recognize 50 residents throughout the year will be the goal given the 50th anniversary, if not exceed that goal, if possible. So we'll strive for 50, to recognize 50 individuals. So when we're out promoting the program, we'll try to encourage individuals, the Facebook video we'll try to encourage residents to get in nominations to help us achieve that 50 residents to be recognized.
So that could be there for 50, is the program stopping? Or what are you going to be doing?
As of now, the program will stop, but certainly if there's a desire by council to continue some variation of it, I can bring that back for council consideration as we move into 2020.
Right, well, I think it's a great program, you know, so I'd hate to see it stop. I mean,
Okay.
especially when we're trying to cultivate the community and doing.
Well, I'll add that to my list as we enter the fall and bring a discussion topic back to council, and we can figure out where you want to head. moving into 2020 with that. I just have one other item, if I may, Mayor. I'm going to invite Brooke to come up here with me.
There was a reason why I was hanging out, so.
Brooke just didn't want to leave, right? Okay. We have become aware that the city of Thornton sent a letter to RTD, Regional Transportation District. And and the letter is related to the fares that RTD has planned to be charged at the 124th East Lake Station as well as the Northglenn 112th Station. And so my ask of council is we'd like to prepare a letter from the mayor to go to the RTD Board of Directors, Doug Tisdale, the chair, similar to the letter that was put together here. Now, recognizing that some of you may not have as much background as others on how the fares are proposed, I've asked Brooke to provide us with some context about that piece of it.
So originally, when this line was contemplated, it was anticipated to go up to 162nd. It's only going to East Lake. So RTD had to draw a line because it has 3-zone fare system, and 112th and 124th fell into the more expensive fare. So this was done about 18 months ago is when we were first made aware of this decision, and I can tell you that there's been numerous occasions where this has been discussed and brought up. The quarterly RTD meetings that they host over here in Westminster for the project. It's been mentioned. I can't remember, Joyce, if you attended one of those or not. I think, but this has been an ongoing concern of ours about ridership and participation at 112th and 124th. And that what we effectively see happening is that this is going to drive those who are income challenged to the 104th station and further reduce what we see as limited utilization by income qualified people at 112th and 124th.
And there was quite a bit of conversation at the RTD board, and they just really didn't feel that we argued enough in that direction. So.
Yeah. I think it's important to point out that there is a new board now and that there's efforts being made. I don't know how they carve out these two stations based off of how their basic approach is.
But I agree with you. I just really don't. I see the folks that would be using it and will be less and less. It's quite a hefty fare.
It's a big jump.
I mean, you can drive your car for the same, basically the same fee as taking the light rail.
Right.
Then you take the light rail and you still have to find some kind of transportation either to or from, the station. So it's something that's palatable at this point.
The thing for me is I totally get why, they may have wanted to increase the fare, but the ending isn't, right, scheduled to be built out even further. I mean, like, it's gonna come a very long time from now. And so it's really just targeting these two stations, which is unfortunate, and I think it's not really helping us cultivate that transit riding community we want to try and do. Everyone's just going to drive to 104, jump on there, and then that's going to have a lot of issues.
So their argument basically is that they are running in a deficit. They don't have the money, so.
I think this is a paper issue in terms of how they get their budget to pencil, as opposed to operational reality. I don't think the RTD staff disagrees with any of the logic that you guys are probably thinking in your heads or trying to articulate. But that's one of the challenges that we have repeatedly brought up.
I support this.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get that drafted, and then I'll have Susan email out a copy to Susan, to all of council after she does that. Thank you.
Oh, I know.